Hello and welcome to One Week, One Year, podcast where we watch and discuss every year of film history in order, starting in 1895, the dawn of cinema. And this episode is 1941. I'm one of your hosts, Chris Ellie. I'm a film projectionist, and joining me as always is...
I'm Glenn Cowell, and I'm a filmmaker.
Oh, got some stank on it that time. I like it. Why I oughta make a film.
I've been watching 40s movies. It's on the mind.
Why have you been watching 40s movies?
Because that's what we do on this thing.
1940.
We watch old stuff.
Did you just hesitate to call it a podcast?
I think subconsciously, yes.
On this thing.
Yeah.
What's up, Glenn? What's going on?
It's been a minute since we recorded. It's all good because we're here again now.
Yeah, I've done yet another move across the country that delayed us for a while.
Yeah, no biggie. I don't know. Yeah, work is wrapping up for the year, for the season. I got a nice shiny new laptop to play with, and so things are going just swell.
Just swell. I got a new job doing film projection at the National Gallery of Art. So now I live in Washington, D.C. Back on the same time zone, so that's convenient.
Hey, yeah, that is. Makes recording, I guess, somewhat more convenient.
I'm going to be projecting The Adventures of Prince Ahmed on 35 millimeter on January 5th.
Oh, dang.
Come on down if you like.
You can have a lot to say about it, too, now. You can answer any questions people have.
I've seen this movie before.
Yeah.
Well, anyway.
You can tell anyone this is actually the first animated feature. Not Snow White.
Well, it's the earliest surviving animated feature, but
True.
Well, we're not a podcast where we talk about what our jobs related to movies are. We're a podcast where we talk about movies, but we're also not a podcast where we just talk about movies. We're a podcast that talks about movies in the context in which they were released. So let's revisit that lovely year, 1941. And let's do our stupid gimmick news segment. Ready?
The news of the year, 1941. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is sworn in for an unprecedented third term as President of the United States. Levity amongst horrors. United Service Organization is formed to entertain the troops. The chemical element plutonium is discovered at the University of California. The National Gallery of Art is opened in Washington, D.C. The Allies capture an Enigma coding machine aboard a German U-boat. A new breakfast cereal, Cheery Oats, is first sold. Gotta do something about that name. The Viet Minh is formed in Vietnam to overthrow French rule. Disney animators go on strike over unequal pay and privileges. Nazi Germany invades and declares war on the Soviet Union. First commercial television airs on NBC. The word teenager is first recorded in print. Wonder Woman is introduced in All-Star Comics number 8. A day which will live in infamy. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, catapulting the United States into World War II.
And that is the news. There was also, it's worth mentioning, there was also a bunch of Holocaust stuff that is a huge bummer, but we need to acknowledge it. But like, it didn't feel right doing it in a goofy old-timey news voice because it was like actual horrors and crimes against humanity.
Yeah,
so, that also happened, but like I don't like doing it in a goofy voice.
Yes. Feels weird to not acknowledge the horrors that are happening. Feels weird to acknowledge the horrors in the established style that we acknowledge things.
Right. I think when we started this podcast, we were like, a goofy news segment. Read the news in an old-timey voice. And now we're like, this news sucks. And I don't want to read it anymore.
Yeah. The news is generally unpleasant.
Yeah.
Well, you know, something that is pretty pleasant.
Well, with that out of the way.
Well, it's something that is pretty pleasant is truth, justice, in the American way. So
I mean, truth and justice, maybe. I'm a little shakier on the American way, honestly. But
yeah. But let's go with it. It's time for 1 week, one reel, and Superman.
yeah,
The
Superman. We got
Fleischer
Superman cartoons.
Fleischer Brothers Superman.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Back to some public domain stuff. Exactly. Oof. Mwah, mwah. We love the public domain.
Wait, how are these public domain? Because it's like,
It had something to do with like
I mean,
how it was like how like who what company owned it and like who renewed copyright when and all that kind of thing.
because it's like Superman, the character is not public domain, but I guess just these shorts are
Correct.
on their own. Yeah. Spoilers, they rule. They're super cool and fun.
Should have called it Super Cool and Fun, but they call it
Yeah.
Superman versus the Robot
Um,
Men
I
instead.
hate the Mechanical Monsters, please. Let's get the name right. Yeah, the first two released were 1941, and one is just called Superman, and one is called the Mechanical Monsters. I definitely seen Mechanical Monsters before. I think I had seen just the, you know, self-titled Superman one also.
I'm pretty much in
Um,
exactly the same situation. Like I've definitely seen the second one. I probably have seen the
Mhm.
first one. Yeah, this is the iconic rotoscoped Superman, which Fleischer Brothers were all the pioneers of rotoscoping, but like this one feels very rotoscopy. But I think that here it's like such a thing. It feels I haven't really counted it or looked it up, but it's like it feels like it's animated on like twos or like very very fluid, very like a lot of frames in this animation, and so
yeah,
there's like a smoothness to it that I think is good stylistically and not just like a kind of weird thing like you're looking at a high frame rate television,
hmm yes, the animation is super gorgeous and like lavish. I feel like it's a lot of like painted backdrops and like they're super colorful and also just full of cool, wacky like 1940s comic book shit too, like robots and death
Yeah.
rays.
Yeah. Uh, before the comic books got woke. Back when it was about death rays. No,
yeah.
I'm joking. Honestly, I think that the painted backdrops are like the best thing about this. They all look
Mhm.
incredible. Like
Yeah.
the animation is cool and iconic, but like the world, the kind of extremely Art Deco world that Superman lives inside of in these like really painterly deco backdrops is incredible. It's so cool.
Mm. Yeah. You can really see, I think, like how influential these have been. I mean, probably the most obvious influence these have had is Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow. Is like has like frames taken directly from Mechanical Monsters in it.
Mechanical Monsters is the big one. Honestly, like I was looking at the Wikipedia page for that short, and it was talking about all of these things that referenced that the Mechanical Monster short.
Mhm.
And
A lot of Miyazaki stuff too.
yeah, well, speaking of anime, there was like uh there's a battle, a fight in the end of Evangelion movie that I was watching that short and I was like, oh, they're kind of like doing almost the same thing here. Like
Oh shit!
there's a point where someone's getting attacked by a whole bunch of like similar robots and like is doing a lot of the same moves to them.
Oh
Uh,
cool.
yeah, I don't know like how intentional it was, but like it felt like this is like the same fight.
Does End of Evangelion also have a scene where robots steal a bunch of jewels and also a lady?
It does.
I do love just the. It feels like such a kind of like old timey like childhood like vision of like what would a robot? What would you do with a robot? It's like I don't know, steal jewels and like put a lady in there.
I mean,
Like there's that bit where right Superman's chasing after the robots flying away and he uses his X-ray vision to look inside the robot.
mhm.
What's inside the robot? A pile of jewels and Lois Lane.
Well, she jumps into
And
the
it's-
robot because she's like If
Yeah.
there's a scoop
So
anywhere,
it
it's
has a
inside
sort
of
of
this robot.
it's inside of this robot that has a scoop for a chest. This big dumpster robot.
Ah!
Yeah, she's there to get the woman's angle. Is I think what the I guess Perry White is tells her to do. Classic 1940s newspaper lingo.
Yeah, yeah. I think in the first episode, there's a part where like Clark Kent is saying like, "Isn't this job a little much for a woman or something like that?" And they in some versions, in most versions that have been released in the last 20 years of that, it kind of cuts it off, and he's like, "Don't you think that job's a little too difficult for it takes it out."
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah.
Dang, I don't remember now which version of it that I watched.
If you had a moment where you said "Yikes, Superman," then probably it was not that the
I mean, I
chick.
probably did it at some point in both of them. It also I also like how in both of these I feel like Clark Kent is like they really lean into like him being a coward
Yeah, yeah.
in sort of contrast to his Superman persona.
I feel like also
Um,
there's so much more modern Superman stuff. There's like there are so many superhero things these days where it's like I see an opportunity to be a superhero. It's time, like I have no choice. It's time for me to be Spider-Man, you know? Where
hmm.
this, especially in the second one, he spends a lot of time just being like, this has nothing to do with me. Like I don't really care about these robots until they steal my girlfriend, you know?
It's like, oh, robot stealing jewels. Who cares? I got a job to do.
Yeah, yeah. Right now,
Yeah.
I'm in Clark Kent mode. Like, and it isn't a job that calls for Superman to stop jewel robots. And now I'm just imagining a vaping robot,
Ooh.
jewel
Mm.
robot. I guess one other thing that I want to shout out about these shorts is that they have an orchestral score that is like super timed to the action on screen.
Hmm.
Uh, a la a Looney Tunes cartoon. It almost makes it feel like
Hmm.
that's just like the way that cartoons are done, is that like the
Yeah.
score and the visuals are like deeply tied together.
It felt very
Almost,
kind of Fantasia-y at times. One just because of how like
yeah,
nice the animation looks, but also I like specific like when Superman is like punching death ray beams,
yeah.
which I also just like that it's like you shoot him with a death ray. How does he fight the death ray? He punches the ray part, like the beam,
Yeah.
and he's
Well,
just like punch it back.
it almost seems like the death ray coalesces into chunks that like hit Superman periodically, and he kind of has
Hmm.
to like like
Punchable chunks.
yeah. Like as if he's in some kind of like rhythm video game or something like that. He has to like he initially gets hit by the death ray chunks, and then he's like, "Aha! I know the rhythm," and then he boom, 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 and then the music kind of spikes with every punch that he does, which it
Hmm.
works really well. I mean, I think there's a lot of scores these days that are not as deeply tied to the moment to moment action, and
Right.
I found it
Yeah.
rather pleasing.
Yeah. Rather pleasing. It's good. Good review. The first of these two shorts was Oscar nominated, which is pretty cool.
Hmm.
Well deserved, I think. And then the second one, Mechanical Monsters, is apparently the first instance of Superman changing into his costume in a phone booth, which like I think of as like that's like so such a big part of like Superman iconography, and so it's kind of cool that like that started here,
Well, and
not
also
in the
the thing that
comics.
started here was that Superman flying, which there were like kind of sort
Right.
of other instances that were kind of mainly mistakes, where this one was like, okay, now that we're animating Superman, like this is like the first animated Superman. Now that we're animating Superman, him being a tall jumper looks kind of silly. So let can we just make him fly? Is what they asked. Uh, was it DC at that time, or was it
Hmm.
a different name of the?
Um, I don't think it was called BC at the time. No, but I'm not sure when that changed. I think it was in the 50s, but I could be wrong. I'm not
So
caught up in my DC Comics history.
Flying Superman. And we have the first Flying Superman, the first, what was the one you said?
The telephone booth's quick change.
The first telephone booth, and then the first punchable death ray.
Mm-hmm. Wait, whether or not we watch more for the show, I want to watch more of these too because I think they're fun.
Yeah. Shall we move on to our feature presentation?
And now we're pleased to bring you our feature presentation.
It's a banner year for cinema, certainly.
Indeed it is.
The most celebrated movie of all time, I would imagine, is this year. And that we will get to last because it is our big daddy for this episode.
Oh, okay. We're gonna do that last. Okay.
I feel like we have to, right? Sorry,
Sure.
like you have to listen to the rest of the podcast if you want to hear about Citizen Kane.
Okay. Sure.
Should we hop to another thing that involves cartoons?
Yes.
The Lady Eve.
Right, because it has animated opening titles.
The animated opening titles in this movie are great.
Yeah.
It kind of made me think that it was a different sort of movie than it is. But,
well, how so?
I don't know, a bit more cartoony and silly, and like it is a comedy, but it doesn't have silly. Like
it's not cartoony or silly like one of the other comedies that we watched.
Right.
That much.
Yeah. It's a beautiful, smoothly animated cartoon snake with big eyes, doing a whole Adam and Eve kind of riff for the imagery in the cartoon intro. Just the opening title cards, but yeah.
I do feel like a lot of the movies that came out around this time tend to have like maybe some art in their opening title cards, but they're stationary. They're like, hey, here's like a timeline, here's like a painting, right? I like how this is animated and it is actually like, right, it's a movie. Have something moving.
Yeah, it gives a lot of life to what are just credits otherwise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, like lack of opening credits is a big gripe that I have with like all movies and TV now. Like opening credits are great and I love them. And there's like, so many things with like amazing opening credits, and now it's just like people are like, nope, skip. It sucks.
True.
Don't skip intro on Lady Eve. Thankfully, it's on Criterion Channel, which does not have a skip intro button.
I hope they're not doing that on movies now. Well, so this is about a guy who really loves snakes. It's really most of what he thinks about.
He's sort of the anti-Indiana Jones. Right. He's the guy that goes to the jungle in the 1940s, but
specifically looking for snakes.
Right, he's all about snakes. He's like, show me where the snakes are. If he went to the Well of Souls, he'd be in heaven.
It's kind of funny that like this guy, you gotta wonder if there is some kind of light coding that like there's a lot of this movie that he spends resisting female attention.
Oh, because he's too interested in snakes.
Maybe, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if that was like a coding thing, this would be the era for it, right? It would be like a Hays Code thing. I will say, the good transition into, I think this is a Hays Code movie, and it's a romantic comedy.
Right.
I think this is a very good example of like the Hays Code kind of making a movie, not necessarily hornier, but like kind of making the movie hotter than it would be otherwise. Like there's so much kind of like suggestion, a lot of making eyes. Yeah, it's just like it's like going right up to the line that they were allowed to do. But that kind of like that restraint, I think, gives it a lot of life and a lot of they like the way that they sort of circumvent the rules end up kind of working in the movie's favor in this instance, I think.
Yeah, and you speak about like the effective sensuality of this movie, and I think compared to a lot of other sort of similar screwball comedy, romantic comedy type deals, like this one is there's definitely a lot of good jokes, but it's not like joke a minute. It is kind of trying to lean more into the romanticism of it.
Yes, it is definitely less kind of madcap than something like
Bringing Up Baby is a good example.
His Girl Friday. Those movies that are like you like miss jokes because of how fast they're talking.
Yeah.
Whereas this is more paced like humans speak. It's not like as insanely just like throwing stuff at you. Like as much as I love those other kind of like Howard Hawks romantic comedies, this is Preston Sturges, another big 40s comedy guy. I appreciate how much this one feels like it is kind of doing its own thing, also. And yeah, I think both the leads, Barbara Stanwyck and Henry Fonda, are both very good in it. Henry Fonda is definitely. I don't think of as like a comedic actor really, but I almost feel like the way that he's very dry in this movie. He's kind of like the hapless, put upon character. He isn't the one who's like making a lot of goofy jokes. It's more things happening to him.
Yeah.
But I think he plays that very well, where he's just sort of like, oh, again? Like, he feels very, like he's just kind of being pulled through the movie, almost against his will a lot of the time.
That's true. Yeah, it is like, him kind of having stronger forces than him, than himself, kind of dictating his existence. And there's like, what is it? God, I'm having a hard time remembering.
He just wants to research snakes. That's all he's in it for at the beginning.
But yeah, there's like some back and forth about like whether Barbara Stanwyck's character, he's rich, which is the opposite of his role in our last episode.
True, yeah, he's really switching gears here.
There's a lot of back and forth about whether Barbara Stanwyck's character is trying to just get him for his money. I think part of the reason why he feels really jaded and uninterested by all of the women around him is because so many of them are just kind of transparently after his wealth.
Yeah.
And so he can't even like, he can't even pay attention to any of them.
Yeah.
And so like the one who gets through to him is the one that sort of negs him.
But it is like, it's kind of a classic. I don't know if it was a classic thing at this point, but like the con artist story where like, oh, I gotta seduce this guy for his money, and then she ends up kind of actually falling for him, and that's like, you never fall in love with your mark, and then
it's the same sort of thing as in like Mr. Deeds or Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where there's like the ideal the simple man who is at first manipulated by a woman, and then she falls for him, and then there's this tension of like, how do I reconcile that you were trying to trick me before, but we really do love each other?
Yeah, I feel like that element is like cranked way up in this, as opposed. I feel like the Frank Capra movies are a little bit more innocent, whereas this is very much, she is like, oh no, she is a criminal. She is conning him to get his money. There's a little bit more kind of I don't know, not animosity, but it's a little pricklier than those movies are.
Well, and they also spend a lot of time in this movie like really being upset at each other, not wanting to have anything to do with each other. Once that happens, there is this kind of back and forth of like, can I trust this person? Like, has this person broken my heart? And so you spend a lot of time in this movie of them really wanting to be back together, like internally wanting to be back together, but then on the surface being upset with each other.
Which, I don't know, I think it is like, it's kind of, there's like the two big set pieces. There's like the stuff on the boat, which is like the first half of the movie, and like the stuff in the mansion, the second half of the movie. And it's like all the like mistake. I don't fully remember all the mistaken identity twists and turns because there's a lot of them. But I don't know, it leads to it's a lot of good like physical comedy in this too. Like I like the joke of his tuxedo getting ruined like 3 times. He has to keep putting on new tuxedos because he's like spilling food on them. There was also a lot of, I was kind of not surprised, but I guess took note of how many like direct references to World War II are in this movie.
I was about to say, yeah.
Someone makes a like very thinly veiled Hitler joke. They mention someone traveling by battleship, sort of as a joke.
Yeah, and also talking about what, like a transatlantic kind of pleasure cruise, and someone saying like, I didn't know that the boats were still running like
Mhm.
between the east coast of America and Europe.
I don't think that they were is the thing, and I think that that's the movie's way of addressing that. Like, I know this movie is being released in 1941 when like we can't use boats anymore because there are submarines everywhere. But like, we're just gonna kind of try to gloss over it.
You gotta the show must go on, I guess.
Yeah. There's a couple of lines in this that really stuck out to me of like great, just like 40s dialogue stuff. Just like the language of it. One of them is when God, what's her name? Not Eve. Eve is her fake name.
Gene.
Barbara Stanwyck, Jean, first sees Henry Fonda's character. She says he's dripping with dough, which is a great way of saying that he's rich. That fella's dripping with dough. And then later, when she's pissed at somebody, she says, "Go peel an eel." Which I definitely want to steal that. Start saying that when I'm annoyed at something. Go peel an eel.
There are so many 30s and 40s turns of phrase that I really just keep wanting to integrate into my life, but you need to. I don't know. I wonder if it's just that like because these characters are written on a page that they're able to speak like this. Because
It's
like
partially
I
that, for sure. Yeah.
never remember to say "go peel an eel." You know?
Simpler things are easy to remember, like "why I oughta" and "make it snap," that kind of thing. But yeah, "go peel an eel" is just a great use of language. But I don't know, fun movie. I don't know if I have a whole lot else to say about it. I also watched it like 4 months ago.
Yeah,
which I think you did too,
right? Pretty close to it. Yeah, I watched it before I moved. Certainly. Shall we do another comedy?
Yeah.
Well, it's time for Hellzapoppin. Yeah, Hellzapoppin.
A musical comedy.
Yes.
And this one is very cartoony.
Yeah. This one, we probably would have recognized that we need to watch this one while doing our preliminary research. But like, I saw I was at an Alamo watching, and I had in the pre-show they had a clip from this movie with a bunch of devils. It said in the corner, "Hellzapoppin 1941." So I was like, "Oh, this is something coming up." And then it's just a bunch of devils in hell, and they like squish people down into like a can, and then into like shove them into like an oil drum, and then put a thing on it that says "canned guy." And I'm like, watch this movie right now.
Yeah, incredible. That like opening scene is maybe my favorite part of the movie. It has so many like really goofy cartoony jokes in it.
Yeah, it's almost a disappointment when this becomes like a real movie, because like the like wildness of the first like 15 minutes or so is really honestly ahead of its time. Like this is a movie that the beginning of this movie feels like stuff that it's going over stuff that would not be explored comedically until the 70s with like Airplane or Blazing Saddles or something.
Yeah,
like
it does have a very similar. Yeah, I definitely was reminded a bit of like Mel Brooks and Zucker Brothers a bit. Also Beetlejuice with the sort of like vision of hell kind of, and it being a lot of just like guys in costumes like poking people.
Yeah. One of the things that I love are the ways that filmmakers choose to depict hell in movies. I'm always fascinated by that.
Which also is a thing that, as we've seen, started very early, like almost right away. Like, we can make movies. We're making movies about hell.
Yeah, I mean, Méliès would have loved this movie.
He would have. Yeah, he would have gone nuts for it. Also, a lot of meta jokes, a lot of like rewinding the movie, yelling at the projectionist.
Yeah, like
this is really the Deadpool of 1941. for sure.
The Deadpool, or let's not sully it by calling it the Deadpool of 1941. Like, let's call it the Mel Brooks of 1941.
Yeah, that is
Like, this
a much
is
nicer comparison to make, I think.
like, this has got the Spaceballs were playing the copy of the movie that you're seeing right now kind of
Yeah,
thing in it. It's
yeah.
got the Blazing Saddles like bursting out onto the studio lot kind of energy. It's
Mhm.
it's the meta humor in this feels incredibly relevant, incredibly you know, you mentioned Deadpool. It's like we're still entertained by this same type of thing, right?
Yeah.
Uh and this is from what, 80 years ago.
Mhm.
They have meta scenes where they talk to the projectionist. There are scenes with Shemp Howard as the
Mhm.
projectionist that were added in later, because
Oh, huh.
the original kind of joke was that the person was just talking to the literal projectionist in the actual theater, and then like you were just assuming what's going on up there as they're like calling up behind you in the theater. But I think they found that might be a little too confusing, and so they added in scenes with the
It's funny
actual
because
projectionist.
that feels very like vaudevillian to me. Of like trying to
Mm,
actually like people in the movie are talking to the like the actual projectionist in the theater,
yeah,
and
it's
it's
breaking the fourth wall in a lot of
yeah.
kind of significant ways.
But it's also interesting how much I feel like there's a lot of like vaudeville crossover in like the Marx Brothers movies, and I don't know, in my opinion, especially the early ones, a lot of it doesn't really work as a movie, like as a movie joke. It's like, damn, this probably would have killed on stage. But as a movie,
Yeah,
it kind of falls flat. Whereas that is an interesting thing that it's like started as more of a directly addressing, like directly breaking the fourth wall, and then like, well, we have to actually film scenes of the projections for this joke to land.
yeah, but I mean, if you were to compare it, the meta kind of stuff it uses the film language a lot more here.
Hmm.
There's literal like like proto mystery science theater in
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
It's yeah, I think that like this is another case like the Marx Brothers where it was something that was on stage and being adapted to the screen, and because they're extremely meta, they're like, this is worked on stage, how is it going to work in the movies,
Hmm.
they're
Yeah.
hanging a lampshade on the entire existence of this movie.
Yeah, there's a
uh,
lot of like there's like a Hayes Code joke. There's like another sort of like any similarity text at the beginning that's like done in a funny way that we've seen it in like a couple other things. Not the same
yeah,
joke, but like I feel like people are like immediately once that text started showing up on things, people were like doing riffs on it, which is kind of funny. Stepping on a rake joke in this movie and that made me think. I'm sure Simpsons writers love this movie so much. And the other thing it did remind me of is like Simpsons humor. I think I can see the sort of lineage of in this.
yeah, whoa. is there
Sorry,
a foghorn
apparently there's
next
an
to you?
ocean liner outside my window.
um
I think it's done.
One of the kind of this is amongst so much like madcap stuff, but there's like a part where uh a taxi cab arrives in hell, and like assumedly like they all crashed and died at the same time, and so the cab went into hell with them. And there's like a pretty good like subtle joke where the guy goes like, the taxi driver went straight to where I told him to. uh uh There's also like, they mentioned the Hayes Code. They mentioned like they mentioned the Hayes office specifically in this
Mm,
movie.
yeah.
There's a part in the beginning where like somebody gets like sucked into a hellhole, and then like a fountain of blood like spurts out of the ground, which
Well,
I
it's
thought
like
was like,
it's supposed to be oil, I think, but because it's
oh, is it?
black liquid, it looks like
Hmm.
blood, and it is a kind of thing where like, damn movie, it's gonna have a spray of blood shooting out. But I think they probably got away with it by being it's oil. Don't worry about
Oh, also, like you mentioned The Simpsons, like there is a part that I'm realizing now must be like a specific direct reference in The Simpsons where they go like, "That's good, that's bad, that's good, that's bad."
Yeah, it is for a movie that I like. I knew existed, but I really knew almost nothing about before I watched it. I'm really surprised at how seemingly like, even in just like vibes, how influential it seems like it has been. I don't know how much it has directly influenced Mel Brooks or like Zucker Brothers or Simpsons or any of that, but it's like it feels like such a like proto version of all of those things.
This movie, yeah, I mean, honestly, this movie makes them, the Zucker brothers and Mel Brooks, feel less creative than I think people give them credit for.
H.C. Potter was doing it all first.
That being said, like there's so much good stuff in this movie, good like madcap meta humor in this movie in the first 15 minutes, and then it slows a lot down. They're like,
Yeah,
this can't be the whole movie, I guess. We don't have the energy to make it the whole movie, and
right. Yeah, the first 15 minutes are like incredibly packed with jokes, like very airplane style. Just like there's so many jokes happening, like overlapping with each other, and then it does kind of slow down and become a bit more of a fairly sort of Marx Brothers esque sort of like,
yeah,
well, a bunch of guys, we got to go to a fancy like not a nightclub, but like a I don't know resort, I guess.
I think it's a
And there's
like a mansion that has its own stage theater.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, and cause some chaos is basically what they're doing, a la Marx Brothers.
yeah. There's also like a class. I feel like another kind of classic comedy bit of like we're putting on a show, and then
Yeah,
they try to sabotage the
certainly a
show.
classic musical bit.
They try to sabotage the show and make it all go bad and for goofy stuff to happen. And then like, oh, we're gonna like the producers are here, they're gonna see it, and the producers love it because it's so funny and everything's getting messed up and like nothing's going to according to plan. Good bit. Good joke. Good joke. I think we should talk about the dancing in this movie, which is the only part of it that I had seen.
You'd seen that before?
I think I had seen at least like I don't think I'd seen the whole scene, but I'd seen at least like a clip or something. Because that was like the only thing I knew about this movie is that it had dancing in it.
What do you have to say about the dancing? I can't really think of what to say.
I mean, I think it is. It's a great like showcase for really talented dancers. It is the only place in the movie where Black people exist, and it's just kind of like we're gonna cut away to this like crazy dance number now, and then cut back, and it's like it'd be nice if they were actual characters in the movie too. But you know,
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That dance scene was so good.
yeah,
I did completely forget about that. Yeah. They yeah, I mean at least the characters are kind of looking on approvingly from the side, right?
it feels like it. I don't know if it's really progressive for 1941, but at least is like they're like getting Black performers in a movie that isn't completely segregated. Like you get your own movie over here, like. But
Yeah.
it definitely stuck out to me that it's like they are not characters in the movie. They like show up for one scene, do a cool dance, and then are never seen again.
Right. Yeah. But the dance, oh my god.
Yeah,
It's got so much energy. It is a really incredible kind of, I don't know, how would you characterize it? It's like a swing dance, I
yeah.
guess.
It's swing dancing before white people ruined it.
It's before white people
I don't think they
add
ruined it.
electro to it.
Yeah, but right. It's like that is like how swing dancing started. And so this is like real proper swing dancing, which is like actually swinging people around and like throwing them up in the air. Which you know, I think if you go to like places that actually have like swing dancing competitions and stuff, they still go pretty hard. They still do the throwing people around and stuff.
Yeah. It's hard to say anything about the plot of this movie because it's just
It
like,
kind of
I don't
doesn't.
know.
It barely has one. There's like
Yeah.
yeah. I also watched this one a while ago too, so it's even harder to remember the plot. But the plot really does feel like an excuse for jokes to happen.
Yeah.
And it's so threadbare. It's so like just 1940s comedy setup of like some mismatched people show up in a place. What's gonna happen?
Yeah, I will say also that like there's a lot about this movie that must have been quite edgy for the time.
I think so. Yeah.
Like, not just like all of the hell stuff and maybe a blood fountain, maybe not, but like there's like a whole the plot centers around this kind of mistake, or a lot of the plot centers around this mistake that people the misunderstanding about like, oh, he was in like she was up in his room until 4 a.m. And they keep like talking about that, and they
Ooh.
were like, who was in whose room, who was it? And like, they are more or less just saying it. They're more or less just
Mhm.
alluding to a hookup situation. But it's one of the more direct references to sex, honestly, that like I've seen, and they seem to get away with it okay, just because they were like, yeah, they were in the room together until 4 a.m.
Mhm. But it's kind of an example also of like Hays Code is dumb. Like you can talk around that stuff so easily, and it's like it doesn't. You're not making the movie any really less explicit. Like
Yeah.
other than just saying like right. There's a bunch of pre-code movies where they just say sex in the dialogue, which they probably can't do now.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's like not a lot has really changed, I guess. Another example, I guess, right, of the sort of like pre-code and Hays Code thing being a lot blurrier than I kind of expected it.
There are a couple other things that I feel like I need to mention about this movie. One is there's a part where someone says he's very rich, and then someone says, wait till he pays his income tax. And that just it seems like a joke, like a just kind of general joke about like, taxes, am I right? But I actually learned only a couple weeks ago, listening to a podcast, that income tax was like new then.
Mm.
It was a topical joke about the recent introduction of a kind of income tax. Let me get this right. It was income tax had kind of existed for the wealthy, but most people like did not pay it. Like almost nobody paid
Mm.
income tax because they were in a low enough bracket that it didn't exist. And that
Now
year,
it's the opposite.
uh,
Now rich people don't pay income tax, but poor people do.
correct. But like that year, as part of like funding the war effort and all that kind of stuff, like there was the introduction of an income tax that it expanded to a whole bunch of other people who no longer paid it. And so it was like, look at this thing that the government is doing
Mm.
now. It's making you pay income tax.
FDR with his crazy leftist policies making us pay taxes.
The other incredibly topical and almost beyond Zucker Brothers, almost getting toward like the Zucker Brothers imitators of like Meet the Spartans and Epic
Oh
Movie
no.
or whatever, is uh is that in the beginning of the movie they are walking through a bunch of film sets, and then they bump into a sled that says Rosebud, and then they go
Spoilers.
and then they go, I thought they burnt that.
In case you're wondering at what point in 1941 this movie came out, definitely after Citizen Kane.
Yeah, but that's wild. They
Yeah.
are spoiling the big twist of a movie that came out that year, like a few months before, But like it was such a big thing. Everybody saw Citizen Kane. Everybody knew it. They could just go like, "Hey, remember the sled burning at the end of Citizen Kane?"
Yeah. Yeah, that is.
That was
It is.
wild. That was wild.
Yeah. Yeah, that is right because it's like even right a lot of these other kind of really wacky comedies don't tend to have a lot of like direct parodies of other movies and like
Mhm.
things like that. So
Or at least like stuff that we have recognized. Maybe like
right,
if
maybe
you
they do. They're all going over our heads. Yeah.
well, where do we go from here? Do we go to Citizen Kane?
We could also talk about if we were trying to say that for the end. Talk about another movie that is I think another kind of good example of a like Hays Code movie that is sort of trying to sneak around the rules a little bit, which is the Maltese Falcon.
Hmm. The movie that created Glenn.
I mean, kind of in some ways. The movie that I basically remade when we were like 16.
Yeah,
I think it's a little bit older than that, but yeah.
watching this, it made me realize how much of I'd seen this before, but I was just like, oh, that's in that's in the package from Marrakesh, and that's in the package from Marrakesh.
Honestly, me too. I was like, I didn't realize how much I just stole directly from this movie. Like, just straight up like lifting stuff.
When we were making for the uninitiated, me and Glenn and a few other friends, we all worked on a movie that Glenn wrote and directed called The Package from Marrakesh. That was a noir movie starring teenagers that I am still very proud of. I think that movie slaps. But,
I showed it to someone pretty recently, and I was like, "This is like not bad."
And yeah, like I had not seen the Maltese Falcon before we made the movie, but I feel like even I recognize some of my own line readings from the Maltese Falcon somehow, you know.
I think it was just in the air, you know. We were just
Yeah.
you know, riding the wave. But yeah, pretty good movie.
Glenn, go on about the Maltese Falcon. I'm gonna leave this one to you.
Well, I know, Maltese Falcon, I think, is usually cited as kind of the first like canonical, in quotes, film noir movie. Like, it's kind of the movie that is usually pointed at like this. There are movies that definitely have film noir elements to them, but this is kind of the one where it's like it all really kind of coalesces into like this is like undeniably a film noir movie. It has like all of the staples you could ask for.
Yeah.
It's about a private detective.
It definitely feels
more
like a film noir.
A sinister, seductive lady who like gets him into trouble, and it has a ridiculously convoluted plot that makes no sense. It makes sense, but it's like it's so layered with like double crosses and like different people's like shifting loyalties and things. That it is. Having seen this movie, I don't know, probably about 5 times in my life, I'm still just like, wait, what? Like, it's still kind of hard to follow. You kind of have to just ignore the moment to moment stuff and just kind of go with it.
How would you say that this is different from other Dashiell Hammett adaptations? Like what do you think makes this noir and not the Thin Man?
I definitely tone is a big one because the Thin Man is like very light and very fun and funny, and it is a comedy. I think even the book The Thin Man is like unusually lighthearted for a Dashiell Hammett story.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the Maltese Falcon, I think this specifically because this is the 3rd adaptation of the Maltese Falcon on film. Yeah. And I think this is kind of like the definitive like Dashiell Hammett film adaptation of like any of his works.
This is like the made for TV The Shining for Dashiell Hammett.
I mean, sure, in the sense that it's very close to the book, but also I'm like, what is there like definitive like Stephen King movie? It's probably not The Shining. It's probably like Carrie or something else. But
it's probably the one with the goblin truck.
Oh yeah, Maximum Overdrive. Yes. But yeah, it's like of all the Dashiell Hammett stories that have been adapted into movies, this is kind of like the famous one, the one that everyone is most aware of. This is, you know, the big daddy of Dashiell Hammett movies, I guess.
For sure. I mean, this is like a stone cold classic. Like, Citizen Kane is definitely more well known, more widely, you know, everyone says it's the greatest movie ever made. But like, did you say overrated?
No, I said celebrated, but yeah.
Oh, okay. It's no Sean Dillman. But the Maltese Falcon is like so famous. It's so iconic.
Yeah.
Humphrey Bogart is never more Bogarty.
No.
Although I haven't seen Casablanca, and I will very soon.
He's very Bogarty in that. Also, The Big Sleep, which is another film noir detective movie with Humphrey Bogart, but based on a not Dashiell Hammett, the other guy,
Michael Crichton.
No, Raymond Chandler. The Big Sleep is also very good, and like also the sort of thing where it is like in on the Mount Rushmore of uh film noir movies, kind of. It's like
I'm looking forward to that.
um
Mount Rush
yeah.
Noir.
Yeah.
You say that this is like, I mean, it is definitely not light in any way,
It's pretty
like
nasty.
the
It's
Thin
pretty
Man.
it's pretty mean movie.
There are some parts where I really, I laughed a lot though.
I mean, it's also very funny, but it's like
Like,
the Thin Man is like a drunk married couple solving a crime with their dog, and it's like the crime almost starts to just proceed into the background and becomes more about just them sort of like partying. This, I think, the crime is still this sort of thing where it's like it is so there's so many moving parts to it that you kind of have like trying to follow the mystery really closely is difficult. But definitely the tone of this is much more the classic film noir. Like the world is uh the world is a like dark and mean place, and like everyone will betray you like
yeah,
at the drop of a hat. Yeah. So it's
yeah.
like love is a lie. Like you can't trust anyone.
The parts that are funny in this movie are mainly like moments of extreme cruelty.
Right. Like
w-
most of the jokes in this movie are like very mean jokes, like jokes at someone's expense, where like someone is getting like punched in the face. Right. Like whenever Sam Spade is punching Peter Lorre in the face, which he does several times in the movie, it's always kind of played
or
as a joke. A little
specifically,
bit.
like there's a part where there's like the other henchman of the fat man who is like this kind of a like sadistic, inexperienced, like very henchman type, and Sam
Mhm.
Spade really has no patience for this guy and doesn't like him. And there's a point where he slaps him, and the guy kind of balks, and then he goes like, "When you're slapped, you'll take it and you'll like it."
Yeah.
And I died.
Yeah, there's a lot of the dialogue in this movie is taken directly from the book, which I haven't read, but I know that like this the script is like very very close to the book. In particular, the dialogue, and it does have a lot of really great film noir lingo in it.
Hmm.
Like saying when he's talking to the cops, he's like, "I won't squawk."
I feel like there are other movies that are more drenched in lingo. Like I'm thinking of like
Sure.
the early
Yeah.
gangster movies where it's just like
Right. Yeah.
all all old timey lingo.
Yeah. Little
Where
Caesar goes really hard on the lingo,
yeah,
and just like also just well written dialogue. Like not even that necessarily like the lingo is that heavy, but like where there's a bit where uh, the femme fatale of this movie, Bridget O'Shaughnessy, is sort of like the first time she's kind of admitting that she's been lying up until this point in the movie. Because it's true, I've always been a liar. And Sam Spade is like, well, don't brag about it. He's also Sam Spade is a funny character in that he always seems like he's a little bit ahead of everyone else, and he's very amused about it.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah,
he's usually kind of the smartest guy in the room, and he's if anything like bragging about it half the movie. He's just like, I know what everyone's deal is, and I'm
yeah.
gonna like
He
play
has
this.
this like he has this vibe about him that is like it's like he's shooting from the hip. Like it
Mhm.
feels like he is, but like he always gets it right every time. He always does it effectively, is one move ahead of everyone, even though no one can understand what's going on in this movie. uh
Yeah,
but like he has this kind of like loose approach to
yeah,
everything in front of him, and he's like so cynical too.
yeah. He kind of responds to everything with just kind of like resigned annoyance a lot of the time. Like even when someone like, pulls a gun on him, he's like, ugh, fine. It's like again pulling a gun on, like whatever. Like
Yeah,
nothing phases him really in this movie.
nothing, and like
It
nothing
sounds
affects him.
boring, but it's like he plays it like so well. Humphrey Bogart is so good at playing this character that it's like the fact that he's kind of so like yeah, like loose and unfazed by things is I don't know if endearing is the right word, but it at least is entertaining to watch for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. But like this movie is. I feel like this movie has a very cynical perspective, and Sam
Mhm.
Spade has a very cynical perspective. He is so unbothered by so many things, like so
Right.
many things that
Yeah.
should bother him. And so, like, the kind of, I don't know how much we should spoil it exactly, but it's like the ending
It's very
moments of the
summed up by
movie.
the ending. Yeah.
Yeah, the ending moments of the movie are, it's like, asking the question, like, can you be as cold as as you possibly can be?
As
And he's like,
ice.
yep.
Right. Yeah.
Is-
Well, and it's also this. It's kind of a weird thing, right? Where he's like he finds out that so there's spoilers for the end of the Maltese Falcon, a very old movie. Um, that Bridget is the person who shot his partner Miles at the beginning of the movie, and it's like he didn't even like Miles. He was like sleeping with his wife, and thought he was like a dumb asshole. He like didn't want anything to do with him really. But it's like he says it's like, well, someone like murders your partner, you have to like make sure that they don't get away with it. That's just like the rule, the unspoken detective rule.
yeah. It's
Um,
weird that, like, there are some ways that he clings so much to principles and, like,
mm,
codes, where, like, through a lot of the movie he is doing things that you might consider to be pushing the limits of ethical behavior,
yeah, yeah,
but then there are, like, certain things that places where he draws a line, but then there are also places where toward the end of the movie he says something to the effect of, like, I'm not as unethical of a person as you think I might be, like,
mm,
he does live by some codes in the big picture. In a moment he's definitely willing to do bad things.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, that's what makes him like a film noir character, right? Like that's like the whole
Yeah,
thing is that he's not a very good person. He's like kind of a piece of shit, and that's
yeah,
like a big reason of I think what makes him kind of compelling. Like that ending scene of him and Bridget in the apartment, like after all the sort of like right there's the whole MacGuffin, right, with the titular Maltese Falcon, which is very much a
yeah.
MacGuffin in the sense where it's like everyone wants it, but it's like very unclear, almost like even what it is until pretty late in the movie. It's a Falcon statue that turns out to maybe just be a fake, probably. Even that is like kind of ambiguous, as is like I think a lot of Bridget's sort of headspace and like motivation, because it's like she starts the movie playing very much like playing a sort of like a very sort of innocent, wide-eyed woman who just wants to find her sister, and then admits she never had a sister. She's just doing this to get Sam Spade to help find the Falcon and to like get him out of the way and all this stuff. And I like how much the movie never like really explicitly lays out how much she's ever sort of like putting on an act. Like even at the end when she's like, "Are you really gonna like send me to jail, even though you didn't even like this guy that I shot?" And it's like we got away with it. Like it's fine. Like the cops have their fall guy. Like everything is settled, and now it's just up to you if you want to just like throw it all away. And it's like on one hand that might be her genuinely having like caught feelings for Sam Spade, and that's a very believable reading of the movie. Is that they actually do feel some genuine romantic attachment to each other. But then
Yeah.
it's also kind of it's kind of up in the air. Like she might still be conning him, and it's like the
I
fact that
don't know if
it's
it's
very like I like how ambiguous it leaves it. I guess
Mhm.
because it makes that scene like have a lot feel like it has a lot of layers.
Yeah, right. Like, is it that she's still conning him and he's still one move ahead, and so he knows that he has to send her up the river? Or is it that he is so bound to his principles that
Mhm.
he is willing to let genuine love go away? He has through the whole movie not shown much respect for feelings, for
Yeah.
love in
He's
particular,
been
but like
outright
feelings
like
in general.
dismissive of feelings. He's been like, feelings are dumb and I don't like them.
Yeah, like he is cruel to people whose husband just died. He's cruel
Yeah.
to people who
People whose
claims
husband,
who
he's just died that he was also having an affair with.
yeah. uh yeah, it's interesting. It's an interesting dynamic for sure. And it also comes as a bit of a surprise at that point in the movie, because like
Yeah.
you've watched him do all of this unethical stuff, and then he kind of like winds the script back a little bit, and he's like, my two things that I will not budge on are no stealing and you got to avenge your partner,
Yeah.
like those are the only things that he really cares about.
Yeah. And it's even, I feel like even when he says that, he feels sort of like annoyed about it still. He's like, oh, you murdered my partner. Like, that's the one thing I can't budge on. Even though I thought my partner was an idiot and I was sleeping with his wife. Like, that's his rule. He set a rule for himself and he has to stick to it, I guess.
Speaking of the partner being an idiot, I think there's like a really great moment of kind of film language irony right at the beginning of the movie, where his partner goes out to investigate this whole thing at the very beginning,
Mhm.
and the scene in the PI office ends with him going like, you got brains, you're real smart.
Mm.
And then it just cuts right to him getting snuck up on and shot, like
Right. Yeah. You got brains, Miles, and then cut to Miles like having a good shot, getting shot in the chest. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really good. One other kind of note with this movie, there is the extremely iconic line from this movie. Someone asks about the Maltese Falcon, and he says, "It's the stuff that dreams are made of."
The line that I undercut in the package from Marrakesh by having someone start to say it and get cut off.
That's good. I wonder if it's like a bit too cute to be in this movie. It feels like I think it's very iconic, but I wonder if it's like a bit of a weird note to end on, because it's like, why would you say that?
It is a little bit, it feels like a line of dialogue more than something someone would actually say, maybe.
Yeah.
But I do like the ambiguity of it, and the way that he says it too, where it seems like he knows something and you're like, what did he mean by that?
Right. Yeah.
Because I think that the clearest read of it is just that it's like, it's the thing that everyone wants, and so like it has meaning because people ascribe meaning to it, even if it is like a fake hunk of lead.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe he's like, I did a switcheroo and I have the real thing. I had the real thing this whole time. Who knows?
Right.
A couple of things I want to bring up about this movie. One, that last scene, the like confrontation between Spade and Bridget. For my directing class at Brooklyn College, I need to pick a scene to like reinterpret or whatever. I'd like pick a scene from a movie to film with actors and like shoot it myself. And I was like, what's a good scene of just dialogue? I was like, that's what I'm gonna be of, like a scene of just people talking. I want something with really juicy dialogue. So I picked that scene from this movie. And so that, I don't know, I've directed that scene with actors. And it was very fun and cool to do. I didn't really, I mean, it's definitely different than how it is in this one, but I didn't have any like big take on it, I guess. The other thing I feel like we gotta talk about is the villains in this movie are just such like, feel like very classic like movie villains.
Gotta hand it to them.
Like Sidney Greenstreet, great. Is his voice is like such a feels like a very like classic movie villain voice of his little chuckle. And
I mean, speaking of classic movie villain voices,
also Peter Lorre, most
Lorre,
classic movie villain voice of them all, maybe. One of the first things I ever saw Peter Lorre in was this movie, which he's very good in and very funny. He's definitely playing a kind of a more of a caricature in this than in a lot of other things. I think actually, if anything, rewatching it this time, I'm like, oh, his character is like pretty doesn't have a lot of depth to it. It's like a pretty broad kind of like stereotype character, if anything.
Mhm.
That I think Peter Lorre gets a lot out of because he's Peter Lorre and because he gets to say things like "You imbecile, you idiot," and it's so good. But yeah, he just gets beat up a lot.
Do you think to a British person the name Peter Lorre sounds like Mike Truck?
Peter Truck, maybe Peter Lorre, Mike Truck, yeah, I guess possibly. It's also funny to see Peter like I don't know if we watched another Peter Lorre between this and M for the show, but like in M, he's like,
The man who knew too much.
oh yeah, which he's kind of playing like a James Bond villain in that, I guess.
Yeah.
But like in M, he's like it's like such a dramatic, like intense role, and in this, he's like a goofy stereotype character, which is kind of it's just funny to see like the progression of that. He does both very well. Is the thing. He's a good actor.
I mean, are these characters kind of new types of characters in this movie? Maybe. Like, are they arch in their own way? Like, yes, Sam
Yeah,
Spade is arch as well.
sure, yeah. And that is part of the fun of this movie too. Of like
Yeah.
the femme fatale is like the most femme fatale character that like you could put in a movie. It's like I feel like a lot of noir cliches are very kind of rooted in this and several other. There's a couple others that are like really. Double Indemnity is another like really big one. Out of the Past is another really big one. We should probably watch those for the show also. But yeah, I mean, I stole a bunch from this movie because it's good, and it just has so much like great like hardboiled detective shit in it of like switching cars, losing tails, and you get slipped a Mickey at one point. Which
Hmm.
any good detective story, someone's got to get slipped a Mickey, right? Um,
just like the package for Marrakesh, right?
yeah, exactly. I also like how at the end of the movie they're sort of like they're waiting for the package to show up that's supposed to have the Maltese Falcon in it, and it kind of everyone it's like all right, they like set up the whole plan, and then it like cuts like later in the night, and everyone's like sleeping or like reading books on the couch, and it's just like a big sleepover with all these like noir characters like reading books silently. That I don't know, that just stuck out to me. It's very funny. And then yeah, it ends with Bridget going in the elevator getting taken away by the cops, and then the it's got the old timey elevator door that closes shut, and it's like a jail cell. Get it? Get it? It's like you're going to jail when the elevator
Oh,
door closes.
I guess I needed that to be spelled out.
Oh
I
really?
guess I needed.
I was like, wow, symbolism movie, subtle much.
No, I mean, I guess what I was saying is that it's like, yeah, we know she's going to jail.
Right, yeah. The symbolism of her going to be taken away to jail is that she's going to jail. But it's like that sort of thing where if this was set in contemporary times, it wouldn't work because like elevator doors don't have like the like accordion thing that
I
closes.
think there are still some elevators like that kicking around somewhere.
There are a few.
Probably.
They're pretty rare. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what. There's a lot of talk of Istanbul, which always makes me laugh because I think of Dangeresque from Homestar Runner.
Of course.
Yeah, cool and good movie that yeah, I agree is has just kind of I feel like kind of become part of my identity at this point of like I like old timey detective stuff, and this is like one of the most old timey detective movies that exists.
Yep.
And was the first one
This
that
is.
I saw. Like I saw this before I saw really I think any other of the classic era noir movies. So it made an impact on me for sure.
There's a movie that a lot of people say is core to my identity,
Hmm.
and that is The Wolf Man.
Oh.
Because that's because in uh 3 separate workplaces I have earned the name Wolfman just because of my general look. I look like Lon Chaney Jr. in a jumpsuit, uh as a furry man.
He's not a jumpsuit. He just has his pants tucked in. I thought.
It looks like he's got like a whole whole thing going on. I don't know. It doesn't make
The
any
whole
sense.
thing going. It's got a whole thing going on. It is true. He does have a whole thing going on in this movie that he is a werewolf.
The thing is lycanthropy.
Yeah. It's like, oh, Larry Talbot, what's his deal? He's got a whole thing going on. He like got bit by a wolf. Don't ask. I was gonna say this is like pretty classic Universal Studios monster movie. It's like up there with the Frankenstein and the Draculas.
It is a classic Universal monster movie. I think personally, not nearly as good as the other ones.
Big agree. I actually was like kind of surprised at how much like this doesn't hold up.
Yeah. And it's not even just like the kind of, the weird gender politics going. That's not even gender politics.
This movie has more weird gender politics stuff, more like weird, like borderline misogynist stuff in it than I think Frankenstein and Dracula do.
Yeah, but it's not even that too. It's like this is like classic situation of you watch an old movie and the main character is just like a total creep, literally like looking in a woman's window with a telescope.
With a big giant telescope.
Like doing a rear window, but unlike rear window, not like problematizing that at all.
Right, but then also like mentioning stuff that she was doing like in the attic to her later. And she's like, how do you know about that?
It was so weird.
I'll never tell. He's so creepy about it.
I'm psychic.
He's a werewolf. This is before he's a murderous wolf man. He's already a huge creep.
This is before a curse turns him evil. He just decides to spy on people.
Yeah. My first note in my notes is Larry be peeping, which I think should be the tagline for this movie.
That's a good name, Larry be peeping. This movie opens with describing like a little text crawl that describes werewolves.
Right, because I think before this movie, it like werewolves weren't a like classic movie monster. This isn't the first werewolf movie by any means. Not even the first Universal werewolf movie. But I did notice that how it's like we have to like onboard people to werewolves,
Yeah, and like it's kind of I don't know, like it makes me want to kind of look more into the history of werewolf lore, I guess, because this movie shares some kind of weird similarities with American Werewolf in London, which is probably not fully unintentional, but it's like it is an American who is in England and like in a small town in England, and that is where he becomes a werewolf. He deals with it in similar ways, similar shots even of the transformation. And like, I don't know, is there something about like small town England that is associated with werewolves? I thought it was just kind of a thing, but maybe it's specifically
werewolves
British
are
thing.
like they're a European thing. Like that's really where most werewolf kind of mythology comes from. This is also notable that like unlike a lot of the other kind of like really kind of canonical classical Universal monster movies, it's not based on. It's not like there's no Wolfman novel.
And unlike other classical Universal monster movies, it's not based. But
you don't agree with the Wolfman, is what you're saying.
I don't. I don't agree with the Wolfman.
Yeah,
I'll put that on my business card.
You were shaking your head the whole time to let people know that you disapproved of the Wolfman.
Don't do that. I mean, honestly, I put less blame on the Wolfman and more blame on Larry himself. Like he is. He's clearly the worst person in this movie.
Well, when he's a werewolf, it's like, well, he's a werewolf. He's got no choice. When he's being a creep, it's like, come on, Larry. Come on, Larry. Yeah.
Well, I was mentioning the opening crawl of this movie because this is like the opening crawl. It says that like paraphrasing. It's saying like lycanthropy is a disease of the mind where humans imagine they're wolfmen, and
there is a clinical version of lycanthropy that is the belief that you turn into an animal.
I will say this. Nothing against furries. Every furry that I've known has been a great person, but it is very funny to describe that as a disease of the mind where humans imagine they're wolfmen.
That is Yeah, it is true. In Universal Studios monster movie language, it is very funny. There's a funny bit where who plays the dad? It's the Invisible Man. Is the dad?
It's Claude Rains. Claude Rains is the best part in this movie.
He absolutely. Claude Rains rules. He plays Sir Talbot. And there's a bit where he's like describing lycanthropy. He's like, there's this thing lycanthropy, and Larry's like, it's all Greek to me. It's like, it is Greek actually. It's a Greek word.
It's good.
It comes from the Greek lycos, which is very funny.
Which is a search engine.
Is it?
It's a search engine from the 90s. It's
cool.
antiquated dial-up stuff.
Yeah, I feel like a lot. I'd seen this before a long time ago, so I kind of remembered it, but I was pretty let down by it, and that I think it does a lot of things that I think Dracula did some of this also, where it cuts away whenever the good stuff's about to happen. Like there's a whole bit right where towards the end he's like, all right, I gotta tie myself to someone's gotta tie me to the chair, otherwise I'm gonna turn to a wolf man. And then it's we don't even get to see him escape, turn to a wolf, and break out of the chair. Just cut back later, and he's gone.
There's one transformation scene in this movie, and it sucks.
And it's not particularly very good or interesting. It's all locked off shots, no camera movement, and just slow fades to more fur being on him.
Yeah, I guess there's a transformation. There's a transformation back, but yeah,
right.
I
was thinking, it's the 40s. They had limited technology, I guess. This is
I would not give it that leeway. I mean, look at Invisible.
Well, this is the point I want to make. I went hard on this episode, and I watched a movie for a purely backstory. So So this is not the first Universal werewolf movie. There's 1935, I think, movie Werewolf in London. A woo. His hair was perfect. Yada yada yada. Great song. But and that had the same makeup designer, Jack Pierce, who also did Frankenstein. And he initially wanted to do the makeup that Lon Chaney Jr. has in this movie, the full fur face, classic Wolfman look. But there's a plot point in Werewolf in London where it's he has to be recognizable as the same person by people that know him when he's the wolf. Mm-hmm. So they're well, that's not gonna work. So that's why in that movie, he has much more kind of minimalist. He has his hair's a little different. He's got sharp teeth and a funky nose or whatever, and pointy ears. Werewolf in London is a much goofier movie, but I liked it a lot more, kind of for that reason. In that it's a lot kind of pulpier. I think the Wolfman takes itself fairly seriously, and is the sort of the stuff that works about it is, or what it's trying to sort of get across, is the horror and pathos of you have this uncontrollable thing that's going to happen to you. You're going to turn to a monster and you have no control over it. And that's a scary thing. Right?
Except you do. You have a special necklace and you take it off immediately.
Right. So it's Larry is enough of a dipshit that it's it makes it hard to get on board with the movie as an actual dramatic piece of horror. And then it's I don't like Larry Talbot. I think he's an asshole. And so I don't care what happens to him. Whereas the Werewolf in London is not, the main character in that is not a particularly likable person either, but at least is that is a goofy, wacky sci-fi movie where there's giant carnivorous plants in that movie. There's it's much wackier, and also the werewolf transformation in that is so much better. It is it's instead of fades, it's moving camera as he's walking past pillars, and it's each time it goes past, he's a little bit more wolfed out. But it's a really cool shot, and I'm they couldn't have put that shit in the Wolfman.
This movie feels so cheap. This movie's so boring. This movie is misogynistic. That it's there's no thrills, there's no chills. What is this?
It has good iconography, I do think. In that the image of Lon Chaney Jr. in the full makeup walking through the foggy woods.
The fog on the ground is good.
And that's also comes very late in the movie, and there's not a lot of the movie that's that, right? That's a pretty brief section of it. Also, this movie is like 70 minutes, so it's like it at least is short. Like it's got brevity on its side. But so yeah, I think if you're looking to watch an old timey werewolf movie, I would definitely recommend Werewolf of London over The Wolfman, even though it's far less well known, far less of like a considered a classic. But yeah, I'm kind of like Wolfman, not great.
Yeah.
You mentioned how there's a lot of American Werewolf in London that is sort of like takes from this, and I have a distinction of like werewolf movies that there were werewolf movies, which is the macro group, but then within that there are Wolfman movies, which are movies from the werewolf's perspective. So American Werewolf in
Uh-huh.
London is a Wolfman movie, but then like the
Yeah.
Howling is not a Wolfman movie. It's just a werewolf.
Okay. Yeah. I can appreciate like this sort of the potential of a Wolfman movie and this sort of the Fly style what
Mhm.
is happening to my body, uh
Right.
I'm out of control of myself kind of thing.
Which a lot
uh
of other werewolf movies do better than this one.
yeah.
Also,
There's
the
two.
2010 remake of this movie gets a lot of shit, and I think it's pretty cool and good.
I got two little notes about this. One is that they just credit him as Lon Chaney in the credits, which I feel like is
Hmm.
really like really obviously like trying to trick you, you know.
Into thinking it's Lon
Uh,
Chaney Sr., the good one.
yeah, it's trying to like I mean, Lon isn't even his name, you know. It like
Hmm.
he's not Lon Chaney Jr. He has a different name. Like it's very transparently just trying to like profit off of the recognition of his dad,
Hmm.
you know. Uh which I don't know how much of a part he had in. I feel like if you start acting under your real name and then you decide to take on your more famous dad's name, that's a
Hmm.
it's a tricky choice to make,
It'd
you
be
know.
like if
Uh,
Nick Cage started going by Nick Coppola now. Same as
uh,
Uncle, but still.
and also there's a moment where I think his second werewolf victim is a gravedigger, and so he just very conveniently kills someone right next to an open grave, which worked out just fine.
If you're gonna kill someone, might as well do it right next to the grave. You know,
Yeah,
less work for everybody.
I guess Jason did that too. It,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I got to say
In
about
the movie Van
Wolfman.
Helsing, he kills a gravedigger who then falls into the grave, like into a coffin.
Nice. I haven't seen that movie in 21 years, so I don't remember that specifically.
It's it's not great. The first like 20 minutes are I think are pretty cool. That's what I'll say about it. All right, we have what, two more movies to talk about?
Two more movies.
The Wolfman takes place in England, right?
There
European
you go.
pastoral shit. How Green Is My Valley takes place in Wales. Similar, adjacent place.
The United Kingdom. They are both in the
Sure.
United Kingdom.
How Green Was My Valley, directed by John Ford, our old pal John
Mhm.
Ford,
Yeah.
making a family drama, sort of coming of age story about growing up in a little town in Wales where people work at the coal mine, and how lovely it was in the olden times before all the bad stuff happened. And I'm kind of
Yeah.
like, that was like a week of your life when it was good, seemingly. It's like, I don't know. I didn't love this, and I kind of wish that I liked it more, but
Yeah, same. I think it's all right. I think this suffers from a kind of bookiness, potentially, of
yeah.
being like this kind of meandering, like kind of unfocused. Like it's got this kind of epic feel, but it's like, okay, what are you doing? You know?
Mhm. I also feel like this movie is very nostalgia driven, and it's nostalgic for like a time that is, I think, is like so far removed from how we live now that it's a little bit it's a little bit harder to kind of hold on to. Like I
It
think
doesn't
when
paint
this movie
a
came
lot
out in
of a
41,
picture.
I
Yeah.
think in 1941 this was like, ah yes, the older generation, they lived a simpler life where like, things weren't as complicated, blah 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 blah, or whatever. And I'm
Yeah.
sort of like, yeah, in like 1880, whatever, like, not that I'm like, oh, who cares? But it's like, it feels like it is like so far removed just from kind of like, I can see this playing a lot better in 1941 than it does now, I guess, for that reason. The fact that it's like so kind of romanticizing a time and a place, I guess.
I think that like a point of comparison with this movie is A Christmas Story, which is
I've seen
another movie. I actually haven't seen it either,
it.
it's another movie that has like this kind of nostalgia. It is the an adult narrator of
Mm,
the child protagonist reminiscing on the kind of on his past, right? And it's this nostalgic kind of look at the 1950s, I believe, for that movie, which may be, a bit more alien to us about like 50s nostalgia than in the same way that like
yeah, I don't know, because I feel like I watch like American Graffiti, and I'm like, I get it. Like I wasn't alive in the 50s, but like, sure, George Lucas, like I can see why you were like, ah, remember in the 50s when we were just driving cars around the streets and like no one cared about anything. I was like, yeah, I get it. Whereas this is like, I remember when like everyone worked at the coal mine and then like everyone died in an accident. I'm like, no, dude, like this sounds terrible.
yeah. I mean, this is a movie that I didn't dislike this movie. I just thought it was
I
I was
didn't
like this.
dislike it either. I think it is a very, I don't know. It's to sound backhanded. I think it's a very well directed movie. But I think I found it hard to get emotionally invested in it, I guess.
It's a visually beautiful movie.
It is,
Like
yeah.
that, I thought, especially in the beginning where it's trying to establish the kind of beauty of this valley, of life in this
Mhm.
valley. There are some gorgeous shots, gorgeous compositions, painterly of
That
just
valley looks
life.
pretty green.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As far yeah. There's a lot of comments on Letterboxd about about it being a black and white movie with a color in the title. But this is a movie that doesn't spend a lot. Like this, the premise of this movie is things were better. Let's watch them all go to shit,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
like a la Fellowship of the Ring. But this like doesn't spend a lot of time in the Shire, This doesn't.
Mm.
Do you see my comparison? I feel like the
Kind of.
comparisons that I'm making with this movie, you don't buy any of them. um, but like this is
I
this
did
is a
think of
movie that
hobbits several times during this movie, though, so maybe not the best comparison.
this movie is wishing for a better time, and it kind of ends the very beginning of it. I believe is like the main character leaving the valley, right, as an adult, uh,
Hmm.
and then
Oh, right. Yeah.
like he's like, yeah, it's horrible here now. I'm gonna leave. Remember when it was good? And then it kind of goes back to, yeah, family life, and then the various dramas that happen
Mhm.
to these people throughout their lives. Some good, many bad.
Yeah.
Uh,
I guess my kind of like gripe with it is it's like, I remember when the times were good. I'm like, yeah, when you were like a little kid, you had no responsibilities. Of course, you thought everything was good. Like, I don't know. I think a lot of the like, I get what this movie is trying to do, but it just didn't work on me, I guess.
well, I don't think it's like specifically him talking about like his own life being better when he was a kid. I mean, like it was materially better, right? Like his conditions changed
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
like his his sister was married off to someone she didn't love and taken away from the person that she did. His brother died in the coal mines. Like there was a strike that like put like made everybody starve, and like in the before times like people were treated with respect, quote unquote, and like striking wasn't necessary, and now we live in this like grimmer reality where people are getting exploited, and we have to reckon with that.
Yeah.
You know,
Maybe it's just like
uh,
that I've been feeling very kind of cynical lately, that I'm just like, the coal mine was always a coal mine. It was always run by like a greedy, like, profiteer. Like, just because you remember a time that none of that was relevant. I don't know.
I mean, I don't think
I
it's
feel
not
like
just
I'm
him though.
coming
It's like
down very
it's
negative on this, but
his dad. You know, his dad is
yeah.
someone who at one point, like, he doesn't support the strike initially because he's still understanding things under the old paradigm before the owner of the mine, either, you know, depending on how you see it, either like decided or ended up kind of becoming more cruel and capitalistic, or had just not realized yet that he could, right? Either way, his dad didn't support the strike because he was like, we shouldn't be doing this because things are good, and because like why would our, you know, benefactors, the mine owners, like treat us poorly, right? And I
Yeah.
think there is there is something to, you know, it's not just like a childlike naivete. It's kind of positioning his dad as someone who is from, you know, an older, more civilized age, you know.
I guess it's also my just like general worldview. It's like that there was no more civilized age. Like, there's like, that didn't exist. Like,
Yeah,
I think the wistful looking back on like, oh, simpler time, things were never simple. Like, if anything, I've learned a lot of that from doing this show, like looking at the history segment. Speaking of
yeah,
dark periods of history, it's like it was never good. There was never,
yeah,
I don't know if
that's
there was a
true.
single year we looked at that didn't have some horrific like massacre happen, or like some
Yeah.
just like really awful thing to look back and be like, man, damn, the past was awful, huh?
I mean, I think that your cynicism is not uncalled for, especially if we look at it in comparison with, you know, our last John Ford movie, The Grapes of Wrath. Like, that's a movie that is very directly and angrily grappling with
Mhm.
like real suffering, you know? It's
Yeah,
like
that I could get
it
on
has
board
a
with.
like the Grapes of Wrath has like a real perspective. It has like a real political agenda. And this movie, I think, like, yeah, it's watered down. It feels watered down. It feels like it doesn't feel as vital as Grapes of
Hmm.
Wrath.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I like a lot of the themes that it's kind of grappling with, of kind of like decency versus like trying to hold on to these like ideals and things like that. Like, the dad is very much like, no, we shouldn't go on strike because like the people who own the mine are humans like we are, and all the sons are like, no, he's a rich human. We are not the same. Like, he has all of the power. We have none of it. Like, what are you talking about? You know? And then he's like,
Yeah,
oh, this is like bad manners to talk like this. And he's like, and I say, if manners prevent us from speaking the truth, then we will be without manners. And I was like,
yeah.
fucking A, man.
Great line. Great line.
And there's a lot. There's like the whole thing of, there's like the Weasley guy at the church who's like, they're right. There's like a hot priest who's sort of all about like not being like oppressively religious, about just like, no, this is a community thing. We all come here to be together. Like, prayers about just like speaking your mind and like putting your thoughts into words. And
Hmm.
he's very just sort of like trying to get everyone on board, trying to get the whole town together. And like, he let when oh god, what's the daughter's name? She has a crazy Welsh name. Not crazy. She has a Welsh name.
Herod, almost like
And Herod.
like in Fury Road.
I also thought of Fury Road, so thank you for not making me feel like a weirdo for thinking that. But they have a whole Fleabag esque romance thing, and he lets her down, I think, in a very mature way, where he's like, well, somewhat mature, because he's like, oh no, like, I don't want to put this on you, like, you deserve better. And I'm like, if she wants to get married, dude, and you're into it, I don't know what you're complaining about. But right, so there's this sort of like forbidden romance thing going on there.
Well, I don't know the particulars of the religion that they're doing. It might be like a, you can't get married, you have to celibacy kind of thing, like
That's what I thought
that.
at first, but then his excuse wasn't that. It was that like, oh, you'll be like penniless and miserable if you're like
Hmm.
marrying me, because he's like so committed to the church. And then there's like the little Weasley guy who's like the deacon at the church, who's like just like publicly shaming people left and right. Like there's a lot of, I feel like the movie is like showing you kind of two sides of like religious like oppression, and also this guy who like actually is like kind-hearted and just wants to help people. There's like the people who are like, no, work is good, it keeps us busy, it's like it pays for our food. And then the other people are like, no, like we deserve more than this, like we're being taken advantage of. That isn't decent either. And so I like that the movie is trying, I like the ideas that this movie I think is kind of trying to grapple with a bit. But I found a lot of it to be maybe a little overly simplistic, a little bit just kind of the idealism didn't a lot of the idealism of this movie didn't really land with me.
Yeah.
There's like they like send the narrator character to school, but then the school teacher is like the meanest man who ever lived.
It's
like
it really reminded me of
so cruel. He's
it really
beating
reminded me of The
children.
Wall. Like the kind of cruel school teachers in Pink Floyd's The Wall.
Maybe
Uh
Pink Floyd, big John Ford fans. We don't know.
I mean, but also maybe that's just like,
Because that's
in
this movie is the only place with mean school teachers. Yeah.
well, in The Wall, right? It is talking about this kind of like institutionalized cruelty within the British school system.
Yeah.
And how it's like perpetuates like a cycle of like cruelty and violence and all of that. And like and so it's, speaking from the experience of a British person who went through probably a pretty similar school experience. So it did kind of ring true in a way.
Yeah. But then it's like they're like, oh, he's gonna be the first member of the family that's gonna go to school, like get a college education. Then like the school is so incredibly cruel to him that he's like, never mind, I'd rather work in the coal mine. And then yeah, he's like a child laborer, and a bunch of coal mining. Like his brother gets killed in the coal mine, his dad gets killed in the coal mine. And right, we're seeing like slowly like this like pastoral, lovely, beautiful fairy tale town is being like chipped away at over the course of the whole movie until it's just this like nearly unrecognizable husk of its former self. And it's like, remember when the valley was green?
There was a point where I was really reminded of the limits of screenplay storytelling, where like toward the beginning of the movie, like the main character kind of catches feelings for the person who ends up marrying his older brother, right? There's this whole scene of him just like, oh wow, she's the lady for me, like whoa. And then she's not available anymore because she marries his brother. And that moment I was like, so his brother's gonna die, right?
And then
it's
he
like,
does, and he moves in with his widow.
yeah, like it's just, I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't have known in advance that his brother was going to die, but it's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, like if the main character is crushing on your brother's fiance, like where in a screenplay is that ever going to end except for the brother dying? And then
I mean, it seemingly does not go anywhere in the movie, but yeah.
Not really.
I do like in the narration in that moment where he's like, oh, some people would say that like falling in love as a child is foolish or whatever. And he's like, but I'm sorry, like I'm narrating this story. Like, were you there? No. He doesn't say that, but that's like the vibe is he's sort of like, hang on, like I'm remembering my own childhood right now. Like you don't come at me. Very defensive narration. I do think like this movie gets at there's some sort of like childhood sort of things I think this is able to kind of capture well. Like I think just even like there's the whole thing where the family hosts lots of, they like have the whole town over to their house and like cook food for everyone. Everyone has beer. And there's like the bit of he's coming down the stairs in his like pajamas, like looking through the staircase banisters. And I'm like, that I feel feels like a I don't know, like a classic childhood memory of the kind of like getting put to bed, but then there's a grown up party happening, and you like sneak out a little bit. You're like looking at like, ooh, there's like grown up party happening. What are they up to? I really like when after he gets beaten up by the Draco Malfoy kid at school. He gets beaten up by the teacher, and also gets beaten up by a bully that he then has to learn how to box from the local boxing lads down at the pub. And they're like, "Oh, here, have like a glass of milk or whatever." And they're like, "No, no, no. He's got to learn how to box. He's got to drink beer. It's the only way to learn how to box." And then when his brothers, when it comes home from school after boxing the bully, he gets beaten by the teacher. All of his adult brothers are like, "What happened?" I'm like, "Oh, they're clearly like the teacher beat him with a stick." And all his brothers are like, "We'll go kill that guy for you if you want." And he's like, "No, no, please don't do that. Don't do that." But then the boxers, the family friends go to the school and beat up the teacher anyway, which might have been my favorite scene in the movie.
There's the movie has this perspective of like that it's the kind of part of the essential male experience to fight.
To fight,
to like,
yeah. The other thing that I kind of like was a little bit resistant to.
That I feel like
like I remember the old times when you could just fight people in the street. I'm like, no, it's not the good old times.
There is like some small part of it that like I know fighting and violence is bad, and it's toxic masculinity and all that. I understand that, but there is a part of it that movie that made me go like, maybe like there are some things that like make sense, or not make sense, but it's like maybe there is something to be said for the catharsis of fisticuffs.
That's the thing is he makes friends with the bully. The bully then is like kind of defends him against the teacher when like he's like breaking up a fight. It's like no fighting allowed, and the teacher is like bend over so I can like hit my stick on this kid. And he's like, no, I won't do it. Like he through boxing the other kid who's bullying him, they like form a respect for each other.
Yeah.
And having not gotten into a lot of fights, like I've not had this experience, but I've heard from people that have had this experience where like you get into an actual fight with someone, and it like there is this like unspoken like bond that is formed sometimes, where it's like you gain a lot of respect for someone having fought them.
That there was a part of this movie that was making me go like, is our modern day society and laws about assault like stopping this some types of beautiful catharsis among boys and boxing lads as well.
But I think it is sort of like, go to boxing class. Don't just like, I agree. Don't just like beat up on people, because that is also
yeah.
But it's funny how much that comes up in I think a lot of movies from like this era. Like I think of like all the Frank Capra movies where it's like at some point the like the sort of like idealistic wonder-filled guy just gets mad and starts hitting people, and it's framed as like, oh yeah, you should be doing that.
He can hit.
And also, Miracle on 34th Street, a lovely, wonderful movie where Santa Claus hits a guy in the head with a big stick and then has to go to court for assault.
We'll get to it.
Yeah. That movie is like fully on board with Santa Claus. Santa Claus actually says in that, he's like, sometimes you just gotta bonk someone on the head. Like that's the only thing they'll listen to. Like Santa Claus said it, so it can't be wrong.
He is a saint.
Yeah. This movie, How Green Is My Valley, won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 1941.
That's
usurping what is often cited as not just the best film of 1941, but one of the best films, if not the best film ever made.
It is the most commonly agreed upon best film ever made.
Which is a little wild for literally any movie to just that is a consensus. But we made it here. This was like at the start of our show, we were like, hey, Citizen Kane, weird to watch in a modern context. Maybe if we watched every movie, maybe if we watched a bunch of movies from every year from the beginning of cinema as a thing that existed, maybe it would land a little different.
Yeah,
So
this is
I say to you this: what do you think it landed any differently for you rewatching it
a little
after
bit.
having yeah, same, a little bit. I did think I liked it. I liked it more watching it this most recent time than I have before.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, this is a big moment in a lot of ways, because like this is like the whole like premise. This is like the whole premise of all of this, you know? Like it was hearing the way that people talk about Citizen Kane that
Right.
made me want to do this in the first place.
Yeah.
Because this whole argument of like it was ahead of its time. It was or not ahead of its time, but it was like leaps and bounds ahead of everything else. It felt like the beginning of a new era, and you know, not exactly. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
saying that there isn't like some really really good stuff in this movie. This is a really good movie,
Yeah.
you know? But like, do I like uh do I like The Thief of Baghdad more? Like, probably, you know?
Right. And that's the thing. I think, especially watching in the context of like, you know, we didn't watch every movie ever made up until this point, but like the broad strokes of like the history of filmmaking up until Citizen Kane. It's not that it's that innovative. I don't think it's just the fact that it's very good. Like it's using a lot of different techniques, and it is doing some things that are fairly, if not groundbreaking, that are new, that are like uncommon, that aren't really tools that are being used a whole lot.
Yeah.
But it's less about how much it's doing that's new and how much if it's just like using all the tools to the maximum effect. And it's just like gathering all
Yeah.
this stuff together and just making a really robust, really well made movie.
Robust is the word, for sure.
And also the fact that it's like a 25-year-old dude who'd never made a movie before, who also produced and stars in it. It's just like, come on, man. Come on. Leave something for the rest of us.
Yeah, I think that a lot of what people ascribe to this movie, as far as its advances, they are technical. They are
Yes, they're
they're
all like cinematography stuff for the most. Well, and screenwriting also. I think there's a lot of structural stuff.
that's part of why part of why in kind of imagining this, I thought that like this whole podcast, I was like, I feel like I want your insight specifically as someone who knows
Hmm.
more about film form from that perspective. Because I look at what before I did this, I looked at Citizen Kane and I was like, okay, like there are some fancy shots, but like what formally is this doing that's so wild? Like, I don't
Yeah.
understand it. No.
Well, I think
Um
also, yeah, I think compared to a lot of like late period silent movies, there's a lot of really great, really cool use of form stuff in this movie. But like compared to like Sunrise or like I think there were earlier movies that kind of stand out more. Just like, damn, I can't believe that they were doing this at this period in time, you know?
yeah. I mean, I think that like maybe what this does is draws into relief the kind of formal backslide that happened when they went to sound film.
Hmm.
This movie starts off with that like shot of the snow globe, and like you can see the hand in the snow globe, and you can see like the person entering through the door through the snow
Yeah,
globe. And
yeah.
it's like a wild shot. Like a lot of there are individual shots in this movie that feel pretty like avant-garde, pretty like German expressionist, honestly just really showy German silent film, you know. And a lot of like the kind of technical stuff they did in this movie to allow for that was like, how can we do a lot of this wacky camera stuff that used to be possible in a sound movie? For example,
Mhm.
part of why I wanted to do all of this, again backing up to the premise of this podcast, is it's like, would I recognize the things that are different in this movie, right? The things that everyone says are big different things that this movie does. And some I did, but some I didn't. Last night I listened to the commentary on the movie by Roger Ebert, and he was pointing out that you could see the ceilings of rooms in this
Yeah.
movie, and like that was like a crazy thing. And
Also,
they,
you can see the
they
ceiling
made
in
this,
How Green Was My Valley.
right? Yeah, it's like they were like that's such a crazy thing. Like they did all of this stuff. Like the ceilings were not made out of plaster. They took fabric and spread it across the top so that they could hide lights and microphones in the ceiling right above people. And make it look like it was a ceiling, but it was made out of fabric. And it's like that was so that they could have all of these low angles and that you could see the ceilings, and how crazy it is that you could see the ceiling. And I was like, I didn't notice that, like I noticed like I noticed there's a lot of like really dramatic like shots like from low down, but like did I think about the ceilings? Like no,
Right, yeah. Right, because that's the thing that it's like, ideally, you're not supposed to be thinking about the ceilings in this. This is not a movie about ceilings. So it's like, you're not supposed to notice any of that stuff. And I think that the stuff that about this movie that I think is, again, not necessarily that innovative, but it's just done really well, is the kind of like the structure of it, I think is pretty like adventurous for the time, in that it is it is the story of someone's life told not entirely out of order, but somewhat out of order, and sort of we're seeing different people who knew him's perspective on him. So it's like kind of, it's not doing a Rashomon thing that they kind of like contradict each other, but it's like, right, it's the reporter is like interviewing all the different people who knew this guy after he dies, and each of these people is kind of giving us insight into like a different part of who he was as a person. That I think is that's a very cool and interesting way to structure a movie like this. Also, the fact that it's like kind of a biopic of a loose fictionalized person.
I
think the writing of it is maybe the thing that feels the most genuinely like adventurous or innovative. Even if it's, I don't think any individual thing it's doing is necessarily hasn't been done before. It's just sort of like, oh, this is like a cool take that feels fresh.
Yeah, one of the other kind of things that is often cited that it does that was ahead of its time or different for the time was like that there's a lot of shots with really deep focus, and like I don't know, maybe
again, something you're not supposed to notice.
Right. It's like I didn't immediately notice that. It just kind of feels like part of the stylistic texture of the movie. But if you asked me if it could have been part of the stylistic texture of a movie from the 20s or a movie from 5 years earlier, I could have been like, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, why not?
It doesn't necessarily stick out as much as I guess I thought it might. I think also because like movies before this didn't have incredibly shallow focus either. Like you had a lot of wide shots with like pretty deep focus already. So the fact that there's a couple shots in Citizen Kane that are like really crazy, where there's like someone in focus in the like the deep background, and there's like a close up of someone like right next to the camera, and they're both in focus.
Although the most famous shot where that happens, it is not actually deep focus. It was two planes that they filmed
through the window.
That's definitely one. I was thinking there's one where Kane is writing the negative review for Susan Alexander's opera, and then his friend is like far back in the background. Part of what they had to do to make those deep focus scenes work was dump a whole lot of light into the background area.
Yeah, because to get deep focus, you have to stop the aperture all the way down. The more light you let into a lens, the shallower the focus is going to be. So especially for like a dark scene like that, you have to keep the aperture all the way closed. There's not a lot of light is coming in. And then just like blast lights on the actors so you can see them.
Right, yeah, I mean, I think, and that's like
in this movie.
That stuff is like really masterful, right? Like they have the I think that like one of the strongest parts of this movie are like the kind of visual compositions and blocking and all of that. Like,
Blocking the scene transitions in this movie are so good. That's the thing that I
yeah,
think probably stuck out to me the most on this most recent watch was like so many great scene transitions. Even if it's like a simple thing of just like I don't know, a lot of like match cuts, a lot of like part of the scene fades before another part of the scene, and then that kind of is like sort of
yeah.
lined up with part of the set or something like that. They're just like the scene transitions are so well thought out and are always like, damn, that was a really good transition.
Right in the beginning of the movie, there is a part where it's slowly getting closer and closer and closer to the window where Kane is dying. And it zooms to the outside of Xanadu, of his castle, and then it gets to
Xanadu.
a closer shot of the outside of his window. Then the background fades out. Then the foreground like dissolves into, how does it work? The it's it's a really wild shot. It's turning the perspective 180 degrees, where it's going from one side of the window to the other side, and it
Mhm.
makes it so seamless through its kind of
Yeah.
use of light, and that you can't even recognize that you're moving from one shot to the other. It's kind of incredible.
Mm.
You phase from one side of the window and the bed to the other side of the window and the bed, and it does it just through like, you drop the light out of the background, you fade from the foreground from one foreground to the other, and then you kind of like disguise that by fading back, by like bringing the light back up on like the new foreground. So you're kind of like transitioning the foreground and background at different times, and
Mm.
leading the focus on the thing, keeping the focus on the thing that isn't changing, so that the change in the shot is completely imperceptible to you. It's and like that kind of thing, along with like what you're talking about, where they are like really carefully um crafting the light situation across a really deep shot with like a lot of different things in the frame.
Mhm.
It's all of this like really masterful stuff, uh, technically, that is being, it's not trying to make a big deal out of itself necessarily.
Right.
It is
Yeah.
just, it's trying to make itself invisible. It's trying to, like, they wanted to make their cuts invisible as often as possible, which was
Mhm.
what I think Ebert was saying, that Toland, the cinematographer, like
Yeah.
his aim was to make as many of the edits as invisible as possible.
And that is like that's good editing. Also, like the editing in this movie, I think is really, really, yeah, really phenomenal. Greg Toland, who also shot Grapes of Wrath, which also looks great. But yeah, it's like I was thinking we were watching this movie, like why do they show this movies to like high school film students or to like I don't think it's a good movie to like get you excited about like the possibilities of cinema, even though it is like an incredibly well made movie
Hmm.
because it's just about like a newspaper media magnate who like loses his soul. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I don't know. It's like um it's I don't think it's a movie that a lot of like very young people can relate to or really find a lot of excitement in. And I think
Yeah.
watching the movie now, as someone in my 30s, I'm like, yeah, like I get it. This movie has like a lot to say and is like really has some stuff on its mind, you know. But I'm like, I didn't care about any of that stuff when I was 20, you know.
Yeah. It's got a nuanced political message, or if not new, it's a movie that has a political message, and it's got like a nuanced kind of take about like the humanity or lack thereof of like the rich people who it
Mhm.
is skewering, I suppose.
It is also, I think, something that is maybe again is more of like a narrative thing that is more innovative or sort of fresh, at least. Is it sort of like it's focused on like media and like the way that media kind of
Yeah.
like controls the narrative and sort of controls the way that people's perspectives are. And how like Kane is actively saying like people think what I tell them to think.
Mm-hmm.
which is like I don't know how much that was. I feel like that's like just assumed now. Like I think in 41 that was a bit more about like, oh damn, that is a strong take to have.
It's media theory, basically. It's the kind of stuff that
Yeah,
people write in college books about
it's like
about
that's the
like
stuff that I'm.
manufacturing
Yeah,
consent, you know?
like that's the stuff that I think is like really is like the more groundbreaking stuff about this movie, and like the way that
Mhm.
it's produced, the way that it's like it feels like this massive. The scope of this movie feels so big and huge, and it was. I don't think it was that expensive. I could be wrong on that, but it's like it uses a lot of stock footage in pretty seamless ways, especially during like the whole like newsreel thing. You're like, damn, like did they shoot all of it? It's like no, they didn't shoot any of this. It was all stock footage and like
Almost
manipulated
entirely,
in
yeah.
cool ways. Yeah.
One tidbit that I got from the Ebert commentary, which was really great, was that the RKO had their own newsreel team, and so he handed over the editing of that part to the
Oh, nice.
newsreel team so that they could make it like really like it was a real newsreel,
Yeah,
which I thought was
and
great.
I think the authenticity of that newsreel at the beginning also feels somewhat. The fact that it's like using a newsreel for exposition feels. I think that kind of thing has been done before, but it's like it still feels like kind of a fresh idea in this movie. The way that it integrates Orson Welles as Kane into existing footage, I think, is pretty notable. There's like the shot of him next to Hitler that is like I'm not sure how they did that. I guess they just like cut him out and stuck him in there. But
I wasn't sure if like they
um,
did that with a Hitler actor or not.
maybe they did that, right? Maybe they just got a guy to dress up as
Right.
Hitler. They got plenty of those running around Hollywood in 41. Like, sure.
I feel. Are you talking about Charlie Chaplin? um,
Anyone. They're gonna and all the many Hitler parodies that people were thrown at.
I guess there's a possibility that it was doing a Forrest Gump, but
Well, it's like but the idea of like integrating like historical or like sort of present. I guess they weren't historical in 41, but like integrating a fictional character into like these real things also feels like the kind of thing like, oh, that's like again, I feel like calling this movie innovative is like the wrong perspective. It's more that it's just doing things in really smart, fresh ways.
yeah, it's using
Again, it's
like
it's not
I
that it's
think
doing
to the
stuff that's new. It's just doing stuff really well.
I think yeah sort of in the way that you said before, it's like it's using the tools that it has available to it
Mhm.
very extensively and very masterfully.
Which feels very that feels like a thing that just Orson Welles through his entire career. Just he loves to play with like the form, and he loves like he started like doing theater. It was like doing it's like great, crushed it as a theater guy.
Mm.
Then he's like, I'm gonna do
Mhm.
radio. I'm gonna like play the shadow. And then he's like, I'm gonna like do this crazy radio thing where he was gonna scare everyone, do a fake like news broadcast about Martians. And then he's like, all right, movies. Like I gotta make a movie. I'm gonna like really try to use all the tools. Like it's a movie. I'm not doing a stage play or a radio show. Like what can I do as a movie that I can't do it in those things? And so it's like nonlinear narrative stuff, like integrating like newsreels and things into it. Like all of these cool ideas that I'm sure he was super excited about. And he was like pushing people further than they might have otherwise. Cause like, no, like let's really do something special with this.
Yeah.
And even like later in life, he's like he tried to have a talk show that didn't go anywhere. But it's like there's one episode that exists of the Orson Welles show that is like a crazy talk show that Orson Welles did for one episode where he like does magic tricks and stuff. And I'm like, damn, he was still trying to like break apart the form of these different things. I think his whole life.
And, there's a perspective kind of floating around that like people give Wells a bit too much credit for this movie. The boy genius who just instantly was good at everything that he did, where or at least like in doing that, their intention is to spotlight the other people, the other kind of notable people uh were had larger hands in the kind of revolutionary
Mhm.
nature of this movie, in particular Herman J. Mankiewicz and Greg
Mank,
Toland,
Mank.
where like Greg Toland had been doing cinematography for a long time. He specifically wanted to work on this movie, and he specifically often liked working with first-time directors because he said that it gave him like a way to play and experiment with somebody who didn't have this kind of established idea from
Hmm.
experience of how movies should be made, right?
Right.
And so like Orson Welles was accommodating all of these people who were allowed to really stretch themselves narratively and
Yeah.
formally.
Well, I mean, Herman Mankiewicz was the guy that had like a real personal stake in this story. That he was like he knew Hearst, and like he used to go to Hearst Castle all the time and get drunk and like go to parties, and like he was the one who had this sort of like insider perspective on William Randolph Hearst as a person, and I think kind of wanted to actually like tell a story about a sort of very lightly fictionalized version of him. I think Orson Welles was also like, "Hey, that sounds cool. Like, yeah, write that up, Mank. Get on it. I'm gonna stick you in a bed for 6 months while you write it." Citizen Kane was also one of the only movies that Mankiewicz like fought for credit on. Like he
Hmm.
was usually like he uncredited writer on all these other things, and that was like the one thing. It's like, no, I feel really strongly about this. I want my name on it. I want credit.
One thing about Mankiewicz
Won an
getting
Oscar for
drunk,
it. So
one thing about Mankiewicz getting drunk that you mentioned is that that part of I'm forgetting the name of Kane's friend who like is the one who kind of
the
doubts
Joseph
him.
Cotton character,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. There's a part where like, he is faced with having to write a negative review of
Mm,
Kane's second wife's opera,
bad
and
opera.
he gets too drunk. Like he's writing the review and he's kind of he's tortured about it. I'm betraying my friend in a way, but also I feel like he's betrayed himself, and
Hmm.
like I'm gonna lose my job over this. So he gets so drunk and he falls asleep at his keyboard.
And then Orson Welles finishes it.
Yeah, and then and then Kane finishes it. Uh,
Right.
but that is something that not
There's
that is
there's definitely a bit
that
of
is
a
in
mirroring there. Yeah.
well, no, there is a time when Mankiewicz was doing a review at the New York Times of a play, and he got too drunk to. I don't think it was for all of these reasons, but that like
Mhm.
literally happened to him. He got too drunk to finish the review, and then he had this embarrassing thing happen where the New York Times, like, they didn't have the story, and so they were like, sorry, like we have to run the review 24 hours later because our writer got too drunk to write the review of the play.
A quick shout out that I mentioned the editing. I don't know if I even knew this. This movie was edited by Robert Wise, a great, well respected director in his own right,
Hmm.
who did a bunch of good stuff. Day the Earth Stood Still, heard of it, a bunch of other stuff too. But anyway, yeah. I mean, what is there to say about Citizen Kane, the movie?
I mean, one thing that I mean, if we're gonna get a little more into the narrative,
Mhm.
one thing that something that you said kind of made me think of, we're talking about like the unconventional structure of the story,
Mhm.
where I think people will say like nonlinear narrative and sort of leave it at that, but this is the same way with a lot of its innovations and kind of impressive things that it does, is that this nonlinear narrative is not just to show off or not just to do something
Mhm.
different. Like
Right.
it is being used intentionally in order to view the story in a certain way. And I think that a lot of nonlinear narratives, it is to add this kind of tension and mystery. But here, to me, what it's being used for is to uh, get across this idea of someone's life as like how your own life can be reflected by the ways that you have affected other people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the only because we don't ever get any kind of firsthand experience of Kane, because all of these scenes are coming from interviews with people who he touched in some way through his
Mm.
life, right? And I think it's really notable that
Like, we're
like
always seeing other people's memories of him.
we're only seeing other people's memories of them. There isn't necessarily a suggestion that they're like unreliable narrators, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
what it is saying is that like this is an aspect of him as seen by another person. How like basically it's saying that you as a person can be represented, that a meaningful part of who you are can be represented by the opinions and perspectives of the people in
Mm.
your life, and that if you do that enough times, this movie has this like rather than just being like a Pulp Fiction style thing, it's like this. I kind of think of it as like a folding narrative. It's like folding over itself
Mm.
over and over again because it's going from young to old, young to old, young to old Kane,
Mhm.
uh, and it's telling the same story but from different people, and so it's kind of creating a larger picture that you kind of figure is relatively full by the end, just because they've interviewed enough people to get a sense of who he is, right?
Yeah. Except, of course, like the ending, like there's like the core of him, the private part, the part that he didn't talk to anyone about, is the
Yeah,
thing they're all looking for. They're all trying to find out what Rosebud means, his last words,
yeah,
and of course, no one knows because he never talked about it because it's his childhood, and it's this
yeah,
thing that seemingly meant something to him, but it affected no one else. It's like, but that is like it is this that is the part of himself that, at least my part of my reading of it is like that is the part of himself that was completely internal, and so therefore it is unknowable. Like no one finds out what Rosebud means
right.
except we as the audience.
Yeah, it's like almost the only part of the movie that is like an objective perspective. It's the only one where like no one, because no one has an insight on it. We only have the kind of objective perspective of the camera to
Mm.
show us the sled, that and that it's meaningful.
It is also like in hindsight, you can find like immediately after he gets like taken away to live with the like Wall Street banker guy, he the he gets given like this enormous like ostentatious looking sled for Christmas, and little kid Kane looks so unimpressed with this sled. He's like, "What is this? What is this bullshit?" He's like, "No, he wants Rosebud. That's his good sled."
Yeah, like, it feels a little weird to analyze Kane because like everybody's done it. But I mean, I guess I don't
Right.
know. That's
I
what
don't know if
like
they have anything new to add to the pile. Yeah, there's like whole books written about this movie.
but to me, right, like I feel like the kind of like first blush reading of the Rosebud is like lost childhood innocence, right? But like if we
Hmm.
break that apart, like what is it? Like maybe
He's thinking about how green his valley was.
like I guess to me, right? The whole story is about Kane being an egotist. It's not like even when you can kind of see it as like a young and idealistic person who believes in things like becoming corrupted, and then like becoming a rich asshole, right? But
Yeah,
like
he's still
he
an
was always
egotist when he's young.
exactly, that's the thing,
Yeah.
is it's like he is an egotist, and then you watch it change who he is depending on what
Mm.
circumstance he's in, right?
Yeah.
Like the consistent thing is that he's an egotist, and if he's an egotist in like a situation where he's got like a scrappy newspaper that he's trying to get like attention, like sure he's gonna
Hmm.
fight for the little guy, uh
Yeah.
but then when he's an egotist, when he manifests it through his wife, who he considers a project. He's like, I'm going to make myself important by making this person important,
Mm.
or just all the just rich guy stuff that he does toward the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And so we don't really see much of Kane before he's rich, but like I wonder if like Rosebud is basically like it is drawing a comparison between like not just like a sort of generic childhood innocence, but specifically like and not like a generic money corrupts, but
Mhm.
it's like would he be an egotist like this if would his like defining characteristic exist if he wasn't rich?
And well, he has that line where towards the beginning of the movie, but towards the end of Kane's life, where he says, if I hadn't been rich, I might have been a great man," or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so there is a bit of sort of like self reflection going on, seemingly, or maybe he's just trying to stick it to his adoptive father one more time. It's like you can't really know, but I do feel like the egotism feels like an intrinsic part of who Charles Foster Kane is. Like the fact that he was rich let him sort of like put that egotism out into the world a lot more. But that feels like it's just sort of a core part of him as a person too much.
Hmm.
A scene that I think stuck out to me more this time than I remember it sticking out to me before is the first time he meets his second wife, and he gets like splashed mud on him, and she invites him up to her apartment. Um, is like that's you can definitely see where that relationship went badly and how it was sort of always probably not a good idea. But it's like you can see in Kane where he starts to kind of like possibly fall in love with her, where it's like she doesn't know who he is. He's become like this super famous figure who's like running for mayor and all this stuff at that point. And here comes along this woman who has no idea who he is, but is still treating him with like a lot of respect and kindness. And he's like, damn, this like it feels good to like be around a person who like has no baggage about me whatsoever.
She's
And we're
treating
still
him with
having like a nice moment.
kindness. She's treating him with a kindness that could only come from somebody who doesn't know who he is.
Right, yeah. But it's like the anonymity there. And he like doesn't try to like deny. He's not like, oh me, I'm nobody. He's like, I'm famous. And he's like, I don't know who you are. And you can see how that he's like, oh, this is like kind of nice. It's kind of nice
Right.
not to have any of this other stuff. And he kind of wants to keep that. You can see why he wants to continue that relationship, but also keep it a secret and like kind of keep it compartmentalized away. And then of course that doesn't work out. And that relationship goes very badly. But I don't know, there's a bit of like sweetness to that scene that
Hmm.
I think really kind of sticks out. It's one of the few moments where I think you can kind of see Kane without a lot of external like behavioral stuff going on. Like he's not putting on a show for anyone as much. It's much more of a like one on one. It's like two people in a room having a conversation without any other stuff attached to it.
One of the things that Roger Ebert mentioned in the commentary is that like when he got splashed and had to go up to her apartment, he was on his way on like a solo trip to the warehouse where Rosebud is.
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
If it hadn't been for that, he would have like gotten Rosebud back or whatever. Yeah.
yeah. Which it adds like he was kind of seeking something at that time.
Mhm.
And like
Yeah.
even though he found this kind of like innocent, but quote unquote innocent, and it's almost like there was a manipulative thing going on from the beginning. But like he found
Mhm.
this like innocent-ish like thing. There's also this like darkness to it in terms of his larger story, because like he had like this moment where he was reaching out for something, and if he found
Mm.
Rosebud, would he have found the right thing? But instead, like
Ooh.
what he
Yeah.
grabbed was something that just
A sexy
fed
lady with a toothache.
it's something that fed his worst impulses again.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, dang. That is because I did definitely pick up on the thing that's like he was on his way to the warehouse where Rosebud was. But yeah, I really like that kind of perspective on it, where it's yeah, he was whatever headspace he was in that moment, he was like probably looking for something. And yeah, I like how kind of unknowable Kane seems, and at the same time, right? It's like any sort of like famous public figure. It's very easy to kind of armchair psychoanalyze them.
That's what this whole movie is. Our armchair
Right.
psychoanalyzing a public
Yeah.
figure.
I like how there are no scenes that are like actually purely from Kane's perspective. That it's
Mhm.
like we are only ever seeing him through someone else's eyes. I think is a really cool way of just making a movie like this.
Oh, one thing that I forgot to mention about that too is that, like, we're seeing all of these stories about the people who were in his life, and we're getting a sense of who he is through these people in his life. Every one of those stories ends with someone leaving him, someone being burned by
Hmm.
him and
Yeah.
telling him to go take a hike. Like he is in this way, like, sort of defined by the connections that he made, but like the enemies that he made. Like every one of them is just like, he was good until he wasn't.
Mm. Right. Yeah. At times it feels kind of heartbreaking because it's like especially early on, it's like he is very charming and kind of charismatic, and you're like, damn, I can see why people would like follow this guy. Like, hey, he's taking over the newspaper. He's sticking up for the little guy, and then it's like the kind of curdling of how he like treats people around him in each of the different relationships is always really kind of like, yes, can be not hard to watch, but at least sort of like, oh damn, that didn't go well, did it?
Yeah.
I did feel like this movie was relevant or like prescient to today in terms of like public figures and like media people and like politicians, but also like so wildly disconnected from like the current culture right now, where it's like, oh, Kane's like running for mayor, it's this big thing, and then like, ooh, he secretly had a love nest with a singer, and it's like that ruins his whole thing. I'm like, that wouldn't happen now. If he was actually ahead in the polls, no one would care. Like that would be in the news for a day.
If
I
you
think
were
in the
if you
movie
were
it
a
happened the day
Democrat, they'd
before.
care.
Right, but it is. He probably wasn't running as a Democrat for mayor of Chicago, wherever it was. Right, things like that, where it's like it does feel like a lot of the sort of ideas that this movie has about like America
Yeah.
still feel pretty relevant now, even if it's like the America this movie is about is pretty different from what it is today.
American problems are American problems, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Worth just mentioning really quick that the original title of this movie was The American.
Really? I
Yes.
think I'd heard that, but yeah, damn. I mean, would have been a good title, I'm sure. This
I
movie
mean,
does have very good. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
oh, I mean, it kind of indicates like where its head is at. Where like
Mhm,
Kane is not about it's not about Hearst specifically. It's about like
mhm.
the kind of like uniquely American sickness that Hearst represents. That Hearst
Right.
is like
Yes.
a kind of synecdoche for.
Hmm. Yeah. No, that's I think exactly what this movie is trying to kind of put out into the world. I think it does a pretty bang up job. Citizen Kane, pretty good movie. Turns out.
Yeah. So where does Citizen Kane rank as
If
best
we're trying to
movies?
like kind of, I don't think it is the best movie ever made. I don't think you can really put that on any movie, right? Like I think part of what is special about filmmaking to me is how diverse it is, right? Like how
Mhm.
movies can be so many different things, and I think trying to put it all on one thing as like this is the pinnacle of film as an art form. It's like no, then you're. I feel like that's almost antithetical to what film is as an art form. It's like does anyone say? I guess some people say Mona Lisa is the best painting, but like it's like there's no best painting. Like paintings can be so many different things. You can't just be like, this was the best one. We found it. It's the best one. It's a
Uh-huh.
lady. It's like that feels silly to say. And so that's how I feel about calling Citizen Kane or any movie the best movie ever. I think it's very good. I will say, on that note, so I watched this like 2 days ago. It was playing on 35 millimeter at the Angelica. So I was like, perfect opportunity. I was gonna watch this
Nice.
week anyway. Cool to see it projected on film. By happenstance, I had a ticket to see Batman Returns like half an hour after it ended, so I had to run to the train, take the train to a different theater in Brooklyn, run to the theater, and then I watched Batman Returns. And after the end of Batman, I was like, I like Batman Returns more. Like, and if you look at my letterbox, it's reflected there. I gave Citizen Kane 4.5. Like, very good movie. I gave Batman Returns 5 stars and a heart because I love Batman
Wow.
Returns.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I
have so many arguments like, is Batman Returns a better movie? Whatever, who cares? That night when I watched them both back to back, I was like, my preference was Batman Returns because that's just like my vibe, I guess.
The idea of something being the best, it is always coming from some kind of squishy human perspective anyway. Personally, I don't see
as opposed to what, a robot perspective?
Yeah, like, I mean, some people might try and like
squishy humans.
No, what I'm saying is that like some people might try and like quantify what is the best movie by like taking average scores put together.
That sounds like a robot perspective.
And like,
I think a robot would say this is the best movie because data point, data point, data point.
That's what I'm saying. Is that what I'm saying is that like, if we're to poll how many points this ranks by whoever decides to score movies based on points, maybe it's the best movie ever made. But like, if we are to grapple with the fact that any human who is saying, I think this is the best movie ever made, they are saying, I think. And that means that like, to me, there is no difference really between this is the best movie and this is my favorite movie. Like, they can kind of have different vibes to them. But like anything like that, it's always subjective, obviously. And so it's like, I enjoy making big, bold, declarative statements that like are just for fun because like I would be more inclined to say that School of Rock is the best movie ever made than Citizen Kane. Like I love School of Rock and there's nothing wrong with it, and I have a great time watching it every time. Like
Citizen Kane, not a movie I throw on a lot.
It's very dense, it's very rich, it's very smart, it's very well made, but it's like, does it have that zhuzh, does it have that little special something?
It's got some zhuzh, but yeah, I mean, it's also just like, it's kind of a bummer a little bit too. And I think I felt that, I don't know, I mean, because I do think this is very good, and it's not a movie that I necessarily and like excited to watch very often. And it's it's not humorless. It's got plenty of little funny bits in it. There's a lot of really funny like little performance things, especially like Joseph Cotton when he's old and he's in like the wheelchair and he's got a mustache and he's like, "Oh, well, you get me one of them cigars. There's a doctor who has a funny idea that I'm gonna live," or something like. He's got like a very.
Side note, the makeup in this movie is so good.
The old age makeup is shockingly good in this movie. Yeah. Where I'm like, what happened between this and like later movies? The old age makeup is very good.
Last year, I actually saw like a sort of small presentation from a makeup designer who worked on some Cronenberg movies and stuff. And he was saying that like old age makeup is like the hardest makeup to do. And it's like, it's so easy to make it because it's the human face. It's not fantastical. Right. It is like, it's something that is so subtle and takes so much skill in order to make old makeup look convincing. Yeah. Like actually,
I think that it's pretty minimalist in this movie, and I think that's what makes it work. Is it's mostly just like wigs and like a little bit of wrinkly stuff, and also performance. I think all the performance, like Orson Welles plays Kane from like 20 something to like 60 older. Like he's runs a pretty, and it's like there's a very clear change in how he holds himself, how his face looks. It's like, it's like he does a really good job of actually playing the progression of age.
The performances sell it really well.
As everyone does. Like everyone that you see at different ages, I think does a really good job. Is there anything else we have to say about Citizen Kane?
Really, really good lighting. There's a lot of, I mean, it's like a little blunt, but there are just like so many scenes where people are like saying things and they're like shrouded in shadow. Or at
Yeah,
least like it's the same scene and somebody like steps forward and then like when Kane makes a dark pact with Satan that like he metaphorically like he's just
yeah,
completely in shadow and everyone else in the scene is in light.
you know,
There's a lot of like there's just like so much. I think that's like another thing about all the technical stuff in this movie is that it's like using it all for meaning, right? Like, I
yeah,
think that like there are movies that are more part of the reason why it's not so obvious with all of its like technical advances and mastery and everything is because it's not like trying to be show offy at every moment. Like it is using
right.
all of this stuff, like all the stuff that it does, it is using it to amplify meaning.
Orson Welles, good director. Turns out.
Cybertron himself.
I
Is that
thought
the
he was a
name?
different character.
Oh, I don't
Cybertron
know.
is the planet they're from.
But isn't he a planet?
He- I think he is a planet. I don't know. I haven't seen that movie, so whatever. Shall we get to our favorites of 1941?
First, I want to say that there is a man named Paul Masson, who
He's not from France, but or he is French, but the wine he makes is not French, but it's inspired by real French champagne.
yes, deep cut reference. I hope anyone listening gets it.
And like the best French champagne, it's vintage dated and fermented in the bottle.
Yeah, okay. Dumb references aside.
The French.
The French. It's definitely not the first time that we've referenced Orson Welles' wine commercial,
and
on
it
this
won't
podcast.
be the last.
It definitely will not be the last. You know what? My favorite is Citizen Kane. It's a good movie.
It is good. My favorite is the Maltese Falcon. Like the Maltese Falcon is a movie that I do own on DVD, and that I do feel like I will like throw on just like as for funsies because
Yeah.
I like just kind of luxuriating in that movie's whole deal.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Citizen Kane. Like I do think I've at earlier points in life I've been more of a contrarian. Like Citizen Kane's not really that good, and now I'm like, no, it's very good, but.
It's very good, but it's good in a way that can easily make someone say, I like Maltese Falcon better.
Right. Or Batman Returns.
Yeah. So what we're seeing here is that like if we were to make a ranking, top 10 movies of all time or whatever, like Citizen Kane would be below Batman Returns and the Maltese Falcon for you.
I don't know. Best films of all, because I do think you have to take when you're doing that, you have to take into account like cultural impact and that kind of thing also, I think.
No, you don't.
All right, then yeah, it wouldn't be on my top 10 list. If it was purely of just movies that I think are just like the pinnacle of the art form, yeah, I don't know if I would.
Yeah.
I'm of also a perspective that I like unreality in my movies. I like fantasy, I like sci-fi, I like things that are abstracted from reality, which I think Citizen Kane is doing a lot of really cool sort of like things with film language that are somewhat abstracted, but it's like you were saying, oh, he's making like a pact with the devil. I want a movie where he actually makes a pact with the devil.
Right.
Like that to me is that's what I love about storytelling. I love like mythology and things that are very taking the inner thoughts and feelings of people and kind of laying them out on like a very big stage of like metaphorical garbage.
I mean, that's the classic thing with this movie, right? Is that like, I think it's very good, but it's a little boring. Like, especially like when you are a teen watching this movie and you're like,
get some car chases in here.
You're like old movie, snooze. Black and white, snooze. Newspapers, snooze. Politics, snooze. It's like
Meanwhile, Mad Max Fury Road, super dense with meaning and thematic things it's trying to say, and what it has to say about humanity and the nature of like demagoguery and the commodification of women and wealth inequality and the slow death of the Earth due to man-made intervention. Also, kick-ass car chase movie.
Yeah, I mean,
Like Mad Max Fury Road is mythology, right? It's like it's very abstracted from reality, and that's what I like about it.
I mean, I guess there is something to be said though, because like I totally agree with what you're saying, but also like Citizen Kane is saying deeper and more nuanced things than Fury Road, and that's maybe because
I don't actually even know if it is.
I think it is. I think that I think that like fantasy can be used to comment on reality very effectively. But I think that like because of that abstraction from reality, it might be possible that like the thing that it's saying is what it is, right? It's like Immortan Joe takes women as objects, women are commodified. But like what else is it saying about the commodification of women besides the fact that it happens, you know? Like where I think that like Citizen Kane, it allows itself to be a bit less arch, a bit more complex, just because like it is making more direct connections with reality. Possibly, I'm not saying that this is always the case, but I don't think that
this is why comparing the two is silly. They're both good movies.
yeah.
Who cares? You know?
Yeah. Okay, so but if we're comparing these 6 movies, Citizen Kane is my favorite. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see how much it shows up on our top 10 of the 40s.
Yeah. Ooh. I mean, I don't know. I think it'll probably. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I'm curious. Like at the end of the decade, if it'll be on the list. I imagine it will be, but could be wrong.
Okay. Well, yes, we've picked our favorites. We've talked about all the movies. Sounds like this podcast is about over.
I think so.
But I think we have reached a large milestone. Maybe like in some ways one of the most critical and important for me. For me at least. Citizen Kane itself.
How does it feel to be on the other end of that?
It's good. I'm glad to have done it.
Great.
Yeah, that was our kind of take at the beginning of this discussion, right? It's like Citizen Kane. Right. It's good. It's a good movie.
Hot take.
Thank you for joining me on this, Glenn. Thank you for
of course.
Going on.
This isn't our last episode, is it? But it's I'm glad to be here.
I have thought if there's a place to end it, if that isn't catching all the way up to now, it could be after Citizen Kane. But I don't intend. Yeah. I have no intention of that.
I'm ready to keep going.
Yeah. Thank you for listening, subscribe, and all that. And time to see y'all in 1942. Glenn, I'm gonna see you next year, buddy.
Yeah, next year. Actually, probably literally see you next year since we're recording this in December.
Nah, I think we can get 1942 in before the end of the year. That's my
okay.
Yeah.
Great.
But see you next year. Bye.
Hey, you guys gonna stand out there all day? Oh, a wise guy, huh?
Listen, you big chump, lay off of this little chump.
Who's a little chump? You're a barrel-waisted weasel. That's different. Let's go. Just wait till this picture's over.